Welcome, councillors. Welcome to tonight's special meeting of the Port Phillip City Council. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of this land. We pay our respects to the Kulin people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. This meeting is being conducted in a hybrid style this evening. We're being streamed on our council webcast page and also on Facebook Lives. Streams and recordings of the council meetings are copyrighted and should not be altered, reproduced or republished without the written permission of council. I remind attendees here in person tonight, welcome to you, and also those of you that are joining us online or contributing to us online this evening, that when addressing council, please extend due courtesy and respect to council and the processes under which we operate here. And please, if you could take direction from me when asked to do so as chair of the meeting. Speakers should and must remain respectful, and statements or questions should not be defamatory, offensive or objectionable or aimed at embarrassing a councillor or a member of council staff. It should also, anything brought up here in terms of council, any questions or comments should be a matter which relates to the powers of council. We've got a full house here this evening. Welcome to Councillor Bond, Councillor Sirikoff and Councillor Copsey from Lake Ward, and welcome to Councillor Consolo and Martin from Gateway Ward, and from Canal Ward we have Councillor Crawford, Deputy Mayor Baxter and Councillor Clark. And this evening's presiding officer is our CEO, Mr Peter Smith. Councillors, there's no apologies for item number 1, so I'll move to item number 2, which is declarations of conflict of interest. We have 2 that have been registered, and I'll start with Councillor Copsey.
Thank you, Mayor. I will declare a conflict in relation to parts 3A and 3B of the recommendation on 3.3, the Council Plan 2021 to 2031 Year 2 Municipal Health and Wellbeing Plan, Financial Plan, Revenue and Rating Plan, and the Budget 22-23 adoption. Conflicts being the acquisition of Packington Street property and service costs for the Port Melbourne Yacht Club. I'll remove myself at that time.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey, and Deputy Mayor Baxter.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't actually have the wording for that, but yes, I will also declare the same conflict of interest, with the difference of I don't have the acquisition of the Packington Street property in there, but I do have the service costs for the Port Melbourne Yacht Club, and we'll declare this again at the item.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Baxter. Let's now move to public comment on the agenda items. We'll now hear from all people that have submitted questions or comments into this evening's agenda item, and public comments on the report item this evening. Statements will be read by an officer on behalf of of a member of the public that's submitted, and some of these have been summarised. Now, I call upon Anne Byrne speaking to item 3.2. We have 3 minutes speaking time this evening for everybody, and your 3 minutes starts after you state your name and your suburb. Anne, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Anne Byrne.
Just get you you got 2 lights in front of you there?
Which one?
You got 2 lights in front of you?
That one?
That's it. Good to go.
Excellent. Good evening, and thank you for listening to me.
Pleasure.
My name is Anne Byrne, and I'm a resident of St Kilda, and I am a ratepayer. And tonight I speak on behalf of the Community Alliance of Port Phillip. CAP supports increasing the rates by 1.75% as allowed by the Victorian Government's rate cap and adopted by many other councillors. This increase is well below the current rate of inflation and the expected rate of inflation, and will allow Council to introduce the FOGO scheme for food garden and other organic waste, as well as maintaining important community services. If the rates increase is not adopted, it will result in an initial $2.3 million revenue shortfall in the first year, which then compounds over subsequent years. History shows that where there is a revenue shortfall, Council trims such services as childcare and early learning, meals and other support services for elderly residents, youth services, and playgrounds, libraries, community arts programs, maternal and child health care, and parks and open space. These are in fact essential services for residents and should have increased funding, not cuts. A rates freeze the rates not going up for the 1.75% will not assist our community move on from the disadvantage that was laid bare by the pandemic, and will further increase that disadvantage if all of those services aren't provided. So we believe that an increase in rates is needed to support our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I call upon Helen Halliday, speaking to item 3.3. Helen, welcome. Just get to state your name and your suburb. Your 3 minutes starts when you do.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My name is Helen Halliday. I live in Albion Street in Balaclava. I'm addressing the Chamber on behalf of BEST, which is Balaclava Environment, Streets and Trees. Over a period of about 3 years or maybe longer, a number of us have been meeting together and regularly talking to council and council officers about the state of Balaclava. And most recently I took a tour with the Mayor, and even subsequent to that I spoke to one of the people who's involved with giving strategic advice to the newly formed Balaclava Ratepayer Traders Association. And in all cases, what is universally told to me and told to us and conveyed to you as councillors is we do not believe that the standard that's been adopted in Balaclava meets standards adopted in any other shopping centre, and we believe that the current state of play where 25 shops are vacant is due in at least probably 75% to the very poor quality of the public domain. We had some proposals and we continue to offer them to the council. We are pleased with some of the initiatives in the budget, including the allocation for open space. We don't think it's soon enough and it doesn't nominate Balaclava. However, we have our own summary of issues that we would like you to address. These include completing the council-owned parts of the Balaclava Walk and Railway Place, including works associated with providing an access link and improvements to Stewart Street and a safe crossing at Nightingale Street. This has been on our agenda with our local council for at least 3 years. The second one is ensuring VicTrack immediately address rehabilitation and revegetation of the embankments east and west, providing appropriately serviced walking paths, lighting and other design features adopted in the Balaclava Walk Master Plan and Balaclava Design Guidelines. We believe that the council should ensure that there are sufficient officers and/or consultants to address all the proposals that are in front of them, so that within this financial year we can actually move forward with some of these initiatives. In addition, as you well know, we've advocated for the principles that are addressed in the Green Line, which has moved from being a City of Port Phillip document to including both Stonington and Glen Eira. We are getting a huge amount of support from those councils in those areas, and we believe that it's now a viable project which is going to receive support at the state government level.
Thanks, Helen. Get you to come to the end. Your 3 minutes is up.
Well, I'm pretty well happy with what I've said. We'd love you to adopt the Green Line. We don't want planter boxes. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon Muriel Arnott, speaking to item 3.3. Muriel, welcome.
My name is Muriel Arnott. I live in Richardson Street, Middle Park. Having been actively involved for a long time in the community, I request this council consider the importance of council-funded social services. When voting on this issue, councillors need to consider the impact and importance of maintaining council rates with inflation rates, ensuring that social services are not cut back at all. St Kilda, South and Port Melbourne have been trailblazers in council-operated, community-funded social welfare issues, from the first Meals on Wheels, family planning, social housing, child and aged care and more. Rates should increase by 1.75%, as already adopted by neighbouring councils such as Stonington, Melbourne and others. For rates to be left at last year's level, with inflation already increased by 5%, will reduce the scope and the quality of services that can be offered by the City of Port Phillip. Good social welfare results in improved community security and lifts the quality of life, which impacts on all. It makes a difference. A well society is a happy, secure society. There is only one valid reason against rate rise. Some ratepayers can genuinely not afford the increase. However, there are ways this can be and has been managed. Our council has always considered this fact and has made provision to manage this. The property values have increased staggeringly in this area, so a reverse mortgage to pay the increase will make a minimal impact when the property is sold. As our councillors, you have the responsibility to ensure services of community care can be maintained, not decreased. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon Daniel Peel speaking to item 3.3. Daniel, welcome. Just get you to state your name and your suburb.
Dan Peel, talking for the ratepayers of Port Phillip, residents and ratepayers of Port Phillip. Albert Park is my suburb. So, ROP busies itself informing and assisting the community on issues often related to council matters as they happen. And as such, the more people we help, the more friends we make. We represent a broader community than you often see represented here, and they're not often heard or seen, while they're often also in the majority of many of the council matters. There's no more important topic to those people that we speak to than the rising costs of living. Many see their hard-earned money being taxed by the council, and they notice little for it compared to those involved in special interest groups and minority groups who are constantly involved with council while seeking help and funding. The broader, more silent community feel somewhat out of step and out of touch with councillors and council officers. They can't quite believe that you would contemplate and propose a rate hike or even consider it at this time, when electricity prices have risen, food prices have risen, petrol prices have risen, bank interest rates have risen and will rise again and again, and all on the back of a lockdown where income was reduced. If councillors were to door knock 50 houses in their community, they would be offered a forthright message on the proposed rate rise. It would be a different message to the one you hear inside these council offices and from the special interest groups who are seeking further and deeper funding. The community is under financial stress and emotional stress as a result of government impacts on their lives, livelihoods and freedoms over the last 2 years. Please understand that every dollar you spend is a dollar you take from the community. You make many decisions here at council that affect the community, and you rarely receive thanks for the work. But at this meeting tonight, you're asking the community to dig into their pockets and give more money to council officers to spend. An important decision such as this must be broadcast to the community that ROP represents. After tonight, we'd really like to be able to congratulate the council on thinking of the community at this time and offering rates relief. Please consider the community who voted you to represent them as you decide tonight. I'm not sure, but I don't think you'd like them to be disappointed in you. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Brian Hanlon is next, speaking to item 3.3. Welcome, Brian.
Good evening, Brian Hanlon, Port Melbourne. I'm the manager of Southport Community Centre, and the Waterfront Welcomes program has had volunteers trained and ready to go to support the cruise ship passengers and crew later in 2022 year, providing a visitor greeting and information service to passengers and crew at Station Pier. The program was halted in March 2020 when COVID began. With the TT line moving to Geelong and Waterfront Place being revitalised to accommodate more businesses, Station Pier is the gateway to Port Phillip while encouraging visitors to explore Port Melbourne and the wider Port Phillip Council area. This in turn boosts local social, cultural, economic activity. The program involves over 50 volunteers, and in past seasons the volunteers have provided over 800 volunteer hours, greeting over 12,000 visitors each year. Waterfront Welcomes was initiated by the City of Port Phillip in 2014 as a key part of the Council Waterfront Activation Strategic Initiative to revitalise the precinct and encourage cruise ship passengers to remain in the Port Phillip Council area, energising and bringing economic and social benefit to the local communities. Station Pier is the second major visitor gateway in Victoria after Melbourne Airport and has been the major gateway for over 100 cruise ships and 215,000 passengers a year to Melbourne and Port Phillip. Prior to Waterfront Welcomes, an estimated 90 to 95% of those visitors didn't remain in Port Phillip, instead taking their tourist dollar directly to the CBD. Since the Welcomes was established, they have greeted over 12,000 cruise ship passengers a year and divert a high percentage of visitors greeted into the local area, contributing significantly to the local economy. Waterfront Welcomes engages over 50+ older isolated residents in active volunteering, providing skills and increasing wellbeing and civic pride. This promotes a positive attitude towards Port Phillip by domestic and international visitors, and Southport Community Centre is well placed to manage Waterfront Welcomers. We have developed excellent relationships with key stakeholders: Paul Littman from Port Melbourne Business Association, Port of Melbourne, Victoria Ports Corporation, Port Melbourne Rotary and City of Port Phillip. SPCC's experience, our local knowledge and networks are assets used to make the Waterfront Welcomes program a success without the cost of developing additional systems and processes. Waterfront Welcomes has clear benefits for volunteers and is highly regarded by visitors who use the service. We would propose that we could get the program back up and running and supported for $20,000 in the financial year of 22-23. For this, we would operate the Waterfront Welcomes program for the cruise ship season, recruit, train and manage the 50+ volunteers to deliver over 750 volunteer hours, greeting in excess of 7,500 passengers and crew by greeting each cruise ship that arrives at Station Pier. We already have our uniforms and collateral and can begin straight away to service the Station Pier.
Thanks, Brian. Get you to come to the end if I could.
Sorry?
Just get you to come to the end if you could.
Yes.
Close it up.
In summary, the program will provide vibrancy to Station Pier, support visitors to the City of Port Phillip, allow volunteers to provide a knowledge and experience of their local area, which they love, bringing tourist dollars and financial gain back to the City of Port Phillip.
Okay.
Thank you.
Before you go, quick question. How have you kept your volunteers engaged, or have you kept engaged with the volunteers as the years of COVID have gone by?
Yes, we've been keeping them involved by actively meeting once a month and catching up with them each week by phone. They are all committed to coming back to the program, and they all want to come back to the program and help the City of Port Phillip.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for your service to the community. We appreciate it also.
Thank you.
I call upon Jack Halliday, speaking to item 3.3. Jack, welcome.
Jack Halliday from Balaclava. Mr Mayor, councillors and officers, I'm speaking for PCAN tonight. We have 4 key issues in this year's budget. But first I'd like to say that since the publication of the draft budget, it's gratifying to find significant funding provisions for open space in St Kilda and Balaclava in the documents under consideration tonight. We welcome that and look forward to working constructively with Council on their implementation, and especially their early implementation. First, we acknowledge Councillor Martin's initiative late last year in bringing attention to the need for the development of a climate emergency action plan 2 years after Council declared a climate emergency. Funding towards its development is in the budget, but we point out that the significance of the motion lies in the word emergency and the need for a stronger and more visible response than Council's produced so far. We also note that the motion required that public consultation measures are to be incorporated into the plan's development. Second, we're asking for Council to strongly support the Green Line ahead of this year's state election. The vision in the Green Line is receiving support from Stonnington and Glen Ira councils and state members. It's important that Port Phillip plays its part. An immediate and visible course of action would be to remediate the shabby and mean conditions around the Balaclava Walk, Railway Place and Nelson Street areas. We're told by the local member that the walk was funded by the Napthine government but has never been completed. It is incorporated into the Port Phillip planning scheme, and it's a real question as to why this hasn't happened. This action would indicate a commitment to the Carlisle Street area as well as the vision of the Green Line. Third, new open space. It was contended at the last council meeting that acquiring new open space in optimum locations needed a fresh acquisition policy. We request that this be done as a matter of urgency in conjunction with the ward councillors and community representatives determining the zones or areas in which that new open space is best located. And fourth, we support the adoption of the rate cap, especially in an economy where inflation is running at 5% and soon anticipated to be over 7%. It's important in maintaining Council's capacity to keep providing key services and avoiding the compounding impact of not adopting the cap, which becomes more severe in further years. And it's important to note that every property which is valued at more than $600,000, the owners of those properties will be paying less in rates this year despite the adoption of the rate cap. Finally, last meeting, Council published the 252 community submissions to the budget. The majority of them, 132 or 52%, concern climate change or related environmental issues, confirming again that these are the community's highest priorities. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, thank you. I now call upon Bill Gardner speaking to item 3.3. Bill, welcome. Thanks for coming.
My name is Bill Garner. I am a ratepayer. I've been a ratepayer in Port Phillip and before that in the city of St Kilda for 40 years. In that time, I've seen the value of my property increase from less than $50,000 to more than $1 million. Like other property owners, I did nothing to cause this extraordinary increase in my wealth. It is pure windfall. And over the course of time, my rates have gone up. I don't complain because I think it is fair and essential if my city is to continue to be the socially enlightened place I believe it wishes to be. Because I understand that the rates I pay are not a fee for service, but are an appropriate tax on my wealth, a contribution to the common good. I am pleased to live in a city which has invested so generously in social housing, childcare, libraries, support for the arts and other distributive forms of municipal engagement. I'm not interested in comparing rates with other LGAs that have different demographics, different priorities, different visions. Indeed, I wish our city would go further and borrow money to enable an even larger vision, because vision is the word here. The budget is not some neutral accounting exercise. It is the financial manifestation of the vision and the plan on which citizens were consulted and on which Council signed off. Quite simply, and as a legislated responsibility, the purpose of the budget is to realise that vision, and it should not be an opportunity to shrink our finances and wind back our hopes for a generous and socially progressive Port Phillip. Councillors should support the very modest rate rise. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I call upon Peter Moratis, speaking to item 3.3.
Thank you. My name is Peter Moraitis and I live in St Kilda. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on the issue of the budget. I speak in support of, at the very least, maintaining current council programs and services, if not expanding them, to create greater amenity, equality and solidarity between all members of all Port Phillip communities. I've been a homeowner in Port Phillip for over 30 years and my rates last year were around $3,000 a year. This year, my rates, if the new mode of calculation is passed, as I understand it, will be about $300 less. This itself is unfair because properties worth less will have to pay proportionately more. But back to services. To maintain services, it's essential that our rates be increased by a small amount to reach the rate cap, which would be the cost of about 7 cups of coffee annually. But for that, when spread over the whole community, would mean that the council would not have to eat into so many critical services that it provides, from aged care to childcare to gardens and dealing with climate change, Indigenous culture and to the arts, and which all threatened the introduction, and which will also threaten the introduction of new initiatives like organic waste collection. A small increase in rates has enormous benefits to us in the community, but the obverse, effectively cutting rates, given the inflationary context, has another effect, which is that the baseline rate is lowered, which means there will be an ongoing reduction in future years, and that means an ongoing diminishing of services. Underlying the push for a rate freeze is the ideology of small government. Behind the argument that government, including local government, should be efficient and should not be wasting money, something which no one disagrees with, is the view that our local government should not have a role in providing the public goods that are so important to creating community and in making some contribution to a more equal community. The small government argument is, if you want a book, buy it. If you want childcare, pay for it. If you want aged service, pay for it. If you want botanic gardens, put a turnstile in. The small government view increases social inequality and in the end is self-defeating, even for its proponents, who will end up spending money on walls and guards. We should be happy with a small rate increase for the small contribution it makes to a more humane community. And so I implore councillors to increase rates to the rate cap to maintain services and programs. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I call upon Alan Renshaw, speaking to item 3.3. Alan, welcome.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
My name is Alan Warwick Renshaw. I live in Middle Park. Mr Chairman, why is the City of Port Phillip's bureaucracy proposing to increase rates at a time when the Australian economy is in crisis and the impact on residents' costs is going through the roof? Mr Chairman, in February this year, the Council's bureaucracy ran a series of 5 3-hour workshops over 5 weeks to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of changing the property rating system, 1, from NAV to CIV, and 2, to implement a flat waste bin charge for all properties in the city rather than the current incremental charge based on each property's rateable value. The bureaucracy's objective for the workshops was to obtain a vote of at least 80% of the participants in favour of each of the 2 recommendations.
Mr Renshaw, I'd ask you to caution your comments there under the standing rules. So let's not besmirch the process of what council officers have done following council procedures. So I'll ask you to. I'm cautioning you. So I'm asking you to continue, but keep that in mind, please.
Mr Chairman, the panel voted 71% in favour of moving from NAV to CIV, and 36% were in favour and 53% were not in favour of implementing the flat bin charge. 12% neither agreed nor disagreed. The vote against a separate bin charge was primarily due to three factors. One, it would advantage the more wealthy residents who would pay less for rates. Two, it would move the bin charge out from under the rate cap. And three, it would give the bureaucracy unlimited scope to increase the bin charge over time. Mr Chairman, councillors need to...
Yeah, that's factually incorrect. So I've cautioned you twice. We do it again, we're going to stop, okay? So that's factually incorrect. I'll ask you to continue, but one more time and we're stopping, okay?
Mr Chairman, councillors need to recognise that any increase in the level of rates will negatively impact all residents, both resident owners directly and tenants indirectly, as the owners of the properties will increase rates to cover the extra cost of rates. I strongly recommend councillors do not approve the separate waste charge or increase in rates. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon David Brand, former councillor, former deputy mayor, and all-round good guy. Speaking to item 3.3.
Oh, good. 3 minutes. Too much love. I can't. I won't be able to live up to it.
Turn the mic on, please, Councillor Brand. It's on? Oh, I can't hear it. Turn the level up a bit.
My name is David Brand. Incidentally, I'm a ratepayer twice over, and I am here to appeal to you not to vote for a rates, to vote for the proposed rate increase. The whole idea of doing a zero rates rise is a small piece of irresponsible virtue signalling that will return very, very almost unnoticeable benefits to individual ratepayers and cause irrevocable damage to council's position and its ability to do the essential services that it produces. It is a bad year that we're in, quite a few years have been bad recently, but the idea of cutting of having a zero rates rise this year is something. It's not something you can just do for 1 year on a bad year and then return. It actually permanently cuts council's funding ability for year after year in perpetuity. This is the way that the system works. So if you want to actually make an allowance for 1 year, you've got to find a different way than doing this, because this is permanent damage. If you want to understand what rates are about, you just have to look at the basic principle of what tax is about, which is taking a small amount of skimming money from the top of the community according to affordability and pooling that money and building a better society, a better community, a better nation in a way that could not be achieved otherwise. And it's the same with rates. It's building a community that could not be achieved otherwise and providing services, essential services, which could not be achieved otherwise. The rate cut is like doing that in reverse. It actually funnels incremental amounts back to individual ratepayers and prevents council from doing essential services which benefit the whole community. The equations that we've heard from over here, that every dollar that council spends is a dollar taken from the community, is actually true, but it leaves out the other equation, that it is money which is better spent for the community in return. It goes back into the community in a way which is pooled and coordinated and actually works for the greater good. It's the only possible moral basis for a zero rate rise is if you can argue that council's expenditure is almost entirely squandered, is almost entirely wasteful, in which case there'd be an argument about not pooling the money at all. But since I certainly don't believe it's entirely squandered, I think it's almost all of it is used creatively and purposefully for essential services and for the good of the community. Even if it's only half used, it is still justified, and there's no
Thank you.
Fundamental moral basis for a zero rate rise. And so I encourage you to vote for the proposed rise.
Great. Thank you, David. I call upon Trina Lewis, speaking to item 3.3. Trina, can you hear us?
Through you, Mayor, if we can't identify Trina, we've actually got three other speakers who are joining us over the phone rather than online, and we might be able to identify them and hear from them first.
No problem. I don't have their names, I take it.
No, we need to identify them because we've got two different ones calling in.
But Trina's not with us, or she might be one of those three? She might be one of those. Okay. So if you're online and you hear us... If you're online and you hear us calling to you and you start talking and you don't come through, just stay on the line, please. Don't hang up.
I'm here. Hello.
Hello,
Trina.
welcome.
Oh, hi. The WebEx link didn't work, so we've got a few telephone hookup challenges. Okay,
That's okay.
So
it's good to have you here. Trina, just get to state your name and your suburb, and your 3 minutes starts when you do.
Okay, thanks. So, Trina Lewis, I'm a resident of South Melbourne, been so for over 20 years now. So thanks for your time and your service over the last year. I'd like to make some observations about rate increases and council efficiency. Along with many others, I expressed the same sentiment last year, but note rates continue to rise. While acknowledging the quality of the debate may have improved with the arrival of several new councillors at the last election and our newly appointed mayor, I suspect there's still some way to go to change the ingrained overspending practices and mentality of this council. Rates are high in Port Phillip compared to other LGAs because spending is high. I understand benchmarking indicates Port Phillip provides similar services to other LGAs, but spends much more on certain services with the exception of waste management. Further rate rises are not justified, and Port Phillip should come in line with other LGAs.
Trina, just while you're getting breath there, if you could, I'll just ask you to be respectful to councillors and council officers. I'll continue, but you've been cautioned, okay?
Okay, I thought I was acknowledging. Okay, that's good. Thank you. So I understand benchmarking indicates Port Phillip provides similar services to other LGAs. Okay, I've said that. Okay. I ask the council seriously consider reframing your mindset around spending. Rate revenue is not a magic pudding, endless and there for your taking. Rates are becoming more and more unaffordable, and it's unfair to continue to put so many people under such financial strain and to, tax the wealthy because, our house prices have increased. Well, they're our homes. We sit in them and, we hope not to have to sell them to afford to stay. I suspect our community is not getting value for money for their rates. Residents want quality core services, clean streets, paths, parks, gardens, recycling, capability and access to good services for aged and children, etc. Quality does not have to be gold-plated, and core services are not pet projects or pleasing every special interest group. I ask the council to sharpen and narrow your focus, and I also ask to what extent you're holding your appointed CEO accountable for efficiencies. The CEO role is...
You're getting a bit pointy there. I'll caution you one more time. You've got one more chance. Keep going, but I ask you to conclude your comments.
Okay, so my point is I'm hoping that the council is holding the bureaucracy accountable for efficiencies like any other organisation would. Other organisations are held to account around efficiencies. Why shouldn't our council be? So that's about it. That's the essence of what I've got to say, and I would ask that you vote against excessive spending, look for efficiencies, and try to aim for rate freezes where at all possible for residents and businesses. So thank you.
Thanks for joining us tonight, and thanks for persisting with the technical issues. So Deborah Sykes is next. Is Deborah online speaking on 3.3? Deborah, can you hear us? Let's give you a moment, Deborah, if you're listening to us, just hang in there.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Just get you to state your name and your suburb. That'd be great.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for giving me the time. My name's Deborah Sykes and I live in St Kilda West. And I'd like to urge the Council to adopt the increase of rates by 1.75%. Without this, we're going to have a revenue shortfall of probably up to $2.3 million, which will increase as the years go on. I'd really like the City of Port Phillip to look after the people, the culture and the future of our community. If we increase the rates by 1.75%, which has been justified, it's given the rate of inflation and the continuing need to maintain and renew the municipalities' assets, it's essential that we look at that. Melbourne, Stonington, Yarra and Bayside councils are all increasing their rates by 1.75% as they recognise that vital community services would be cut without this increase. We don't want to be left behind and become a second-rate municipality. Please look after the community as your role requires. Saving money isn't everything. That's not why I chose to live here. I need an ambitious council that has a vision for the community, not an uninspired mantra about saving money. We need the development of a strong and comprehensive climate emergency action plan ready to be implemented in 23-24. We need strong support for the Green Line walking path and biodiversity corridor. We need urgent development of land acquisition for additional open space, especially in the most efficient areas of St Kilda East, Balaclava and Ripponlea, which was highlighted during the COVID crisis. It's up to Council to ensure that it has the income to do this and more in line with state government guidelines. So again, I would like to urge the Council to adopt the increase of the rates. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. I call upon Jan Costa, speaking on item 3.3. Jan, can you hear us?
It's on the but it'll be 2 minutes behind on the net.
There we go. There is a bit of a delay, Jan. That's not Jan. Who is that just said there's a delay? Philip? Philip, John?
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, good. This is Philip Hoytson speaking. Is it okay to go ahead?
Welcome to the show. Get you to state your name and your suburb, and then your 3 minutes starts when you do, Phil.
Okay. Sure, thank you. My name is Philip Hoytson. I'm the Managing Director of Wild at Heart, a small not-for-profit organisation working in the city of Port Phillip for over 20 years. I'm speaking particularly to a motion tonight to provide a fee waiver for the use of Soul Green Community Centre to Wild at Heart and the program participants over the next 3 years. Some councillors will be familiar with what we do. We run a unique music program based at Soul Green Centre in South Melbourne for the past 15 plus years. We support highly marginalised and disenfranchised people within the city of Port Phillip. People who have mental illness, disability, neurodiversity, trauma and disadvantage, some of the most disadvantaged people in your community. Through creating original songs and music, the program supports people to be included in the community, to find wellness, to develop new skills, express their identities and to create pathways to being contributing members of society, reducing the welfare and other social service costs that are required to support them when they're living disadvantaged lives. This is not simply a sing-along program, but a very transformative, life-changing program that comes out of the use of music. City Port Phillip councillors, some of whom, and MP Josh Burns, have visited the program over the past years and events that we've held and seen firsthand its powerful impact. The program makes a unique contribution to Council's strategic plan goals of inclusion of all people, of livability and development, and of a vibrant Port Phillip, particularly involving all people, and we work with highly marginalised people, so we hear all voices in City of Port Phillip's cultural vibrancy. The Council has provided Sol Green to Wild at Heart for this program on an in-kind basis for the past 15 years. And the in-kind provision of this venue, we are very, very grateful for that support, is a key part of the sustainability of the program. We do not have the funding to pay a sudden impost of almost $9,000 per annum venue hire fees. This would jeopardise our program. It would risk us having to close or highly significantly reduce the activity that we currently provide in supporting people. We employ professional artists and project managers to ensure the program works. We have over 50 people involved, participants involved, and people that we need to pay to provide professional services to the program. Our income, a small amount, comes from Port Phillip Community Group for community-based education, and we have some participants, about 50%, who have NDIS plans. The NDIS planned income is capped and does not cover the full cost of the program. Participants are subsidised in their participation, even those who pay through NDIS. So I am here tonight to request your support for the motion to enable this essential program to continue in the City of Port Phillip.
And thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Now, we've got two more callers on the line. So one could be John Myers, or whoever is on the line, if you could speak.
My name's John Myers.
Hey, welcome, John.
Thank you. My name's John Myers. I'm a ratepayer in South Melbourne. I'll be brief. The function of a council is to provide services. It is, I think, desirable that it does so, and I would have thought that in relation to the disadvantaged members of any community, it has an obligation to do so. That costs money. Inflation is predicted to rise to between 5 and 7% in the next couple of years. The requested rates rise is, I understand, 1.7%. The figures simply don't add up. Either you reduce your services, without the rate rise, you would simply have to reduce services. In fact, even with the rate rise, I would have thought that the council would be obliged to reduce services. It seems to me that, if anything, the rates ought to go beyond 1.7% rather than be capped at 1.7%. I've heard an argument that the ratepayers of Port Phillip simply can't afford this sort of impost. I frankly think that that's a very, very difficult argument. We live in Australia in a society which is hugely affluent. The Port Phillip area is, as I understand it, one of the most affluent societies that the world has ever seen. Renters may well have substantial difficulties with this sort of rate rise. Renters won't pay the rate rise. The owners of property in this shire have benefited hugely from housing prices going up, from inflation. We are, quite frankly, wealthy, and if we cannot afford something like a 1.7% increase in order to provide the sorts of services which a council provides, including and particularly social services, social housing, childcare, and the sorts of things which the less affluent in our society need and which are supplied by council, then we're in a very, very poor condition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Now, there's one more person on the line on the phone, or have we lost them? Nobody left? Do we have the other virtual people on the line? Okay. Have we got some statements? So we've got one here. So Judith Klepner is the first one.
Yes, through you, Mayor.
If you go ahead, that'd be great.
Yes, Judith wasn't able to attend, so I'll read this on her behalf. Hello, councillors. My statement is in support of the proposal to increase our rates to meet the modest cap of 1.75% allowed. Port Phillip Council has had a worthy record of support for its community in the provision of excellent services and infrastructure, which might well be at risk in the absence of this below-inflation increase. It is hard to see how services cannot be reduced or how the city's important asset base can be maintained and renewed as costs increase if we do not also increase rates. This year's plan and budget paper outlines a number of welcome environmental and other initiatives which may no longer be affordable. Rates relief measures already in place can continue to assist those under genuine pressure. I know that as councillors you must be proud of the excellent services council provides, enhancing the quality of life of local residents and visitors and ensuring the city's day-to-day and long-term livability and desirability. I also believe that you are motivated to be on council to support the community, to make Port Phillip an even better place to live, and that you would prefer to be remembered for your contributions to enhancing the city rather than how Port Phillip became a lesser place on your watch. Thank you.
The next one's from Brittany Quayle in relation to item 3.3, and she asks, will the council be continuing its funding agreement with the National Trust to enable residents to enter Ripponlea Estate free of charge? This has been an innovative and much-loved council initiative that has enabled families across this beautiful to access this beautiful estate. For example, we have been able to host nature playgroups at the estate to foster our children's love of nature and rebuild a wonderful community post-COVID. And a councillor may take that question up when we get to that item. Who's next on your list? Have we got anyone on the line? Do you want to read the next one? Go for it.
Through you, Mayor, I'll read a statement from Lane Stewart on item 3.3. Councillors, I plead with you to vote for the maximum permissible rate increase under the state government cap. If you do not do so, it is inevitable that services will be reduced or cut. I accept that funding the range of services Council provides is costly. I am happy, as others are, to pay our share. Some do not want to do so. Councillors, rather than pleasing some, should try to shift our collective focus on what we can achieve for the common good. In some quarters, that concept is old-fashioned. If my understanding of the proposed new rating scheme is correct, the owners of some expensive property will be paying less rates than previously. I'm speculating that some of them will be arguing against council funding the range of services available. Historically, COP and its predecessor councils are attuned to the spread of social needs within their communities and made appropriate provision. My fear is that we are drifting away from those former sound and necessary practices. I support increasing the rates by the maximum under the cap and encourage councillors to vote in favour.
Thanks very much. I now call out on behalf of Della Bradshaw, and two comments made. Firstly, I say no to a rate freeze. It will inevitably mean a cut in a range of community services. I believe increasing rates to the 1.75% rates cap is justified. Melbourne, Stonington, Yarra and Bayside councils are all increasing rates by the 1.75 cap, as they too recognise the vital community services that would be cut without this increase. It is important that council demonstrates strong support for the Green Line walking path and biodiversity corridor ahead of the state election this year. It is supported by the Glenara and Stonington councils, as well as the state members for Prahran and Caulfield. I ask Port Phillip bring its funding forward to 23-24. And who is next?
Through you, Mayor, I'll read the statement from Leslie Rosenblatt. I'm speaking in support of the submission to Council by the Port Phillip Emergency Climate Action Network, PCAN, regarding the urgency and importance of a stronger and comprehensive climate emergency plan capable of implementation commencement in 2023-24. I also endorse PCAN's group request that the funding for the Green Line walking path and biodiversity corridor be brought forward to 23-24. In addition, PCAN's submission that the Council should urgently develop criteria for land acquisition for additional public open space in its most deficient area of St Kilda East, Balaclava and Ripponlea has my full support. Finally, as a resident whose partner is a regular weekly volunteer at the Eco Centre, I feel I feel that its building redevelopment and services are vitally valuable to our community and hope that Council will vigorously sustain this work with adequate and timely resourcing.
Thanks very much. I'll read the final one out from Stephen Pennells, and there's another one from Gail, which I'll ask governance to read out. Support the rate rise as... Sorry, Stephen Pennells, support rate rise as Ararat Alexander Gardens have been devastated by rate cuts, and support Council increasing budget to the Port Phillip Housing Trust so that, I'm paraphrasing here, but so that shade sail over the still slide at Centenary Reserve Playground can be installed in Port Melbourne. Thank you. And the final one's from Gail Hastings.
Through you, Mayor. I add my voice to the call on Council to increase rates by 1.75% to ensure vital schemes that include the Green Line walking track, FOGO, land acquisition for open space and the Climate Emergency Action Plan are attended to without delay. Nature's destruction has to be countered by our every effort if we are to avoid the worst. As well, St Kilda, one of the few suburbs known throughout Australia, is the only suburb strongly associated with the arts. Art is the historical foundation for our apartment building in which we all live here in Port Phillip. The arts have saturated our environment unlike any other suburb, and yet when you visit St Kilda today, you would be forgiven for thinking otherwise. Port Phillip has a responsibility to revolutionise the survival of art in Australia unlike any other suburb, yet where is Port Phillip's think tank that can strategise a solution? In conclusion, councillors, I do not envy your task tonight, as I admit if the rates do not rise, I, for one, will for a split second bemoan the increased financial distress. Far more importantly, though, I will thank you for attending to the cracks in our building that no individual ratepayer can see in their entirety, let alone fix. Thank you.
Councillors, that concludes that part of the meeting in terms of public comment on agenda items. Oh, we got one more. Who have we got? John Spearings. Come on down. Are you there, John?
Thank you, Mayor. John Spearings from Elwood. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to comment on the budget and the council plan. Increasing rates to the 1.5% rates cap is justified in terms of generally maintaining services, having the ability to introduce a municipal-wide FOGO scheme, and enabling council to meet rising costs at a time of rising inflation. Most councils across Melbourne and indeed the state are lifting rates to the cap, not surprisingly. Not adopting the cap would mean either not proceeding with FOGO services across the municipality, or if FOGO went ahead, cuts to vital community services instead. I'm proud that Port Phillip continues to provide statewide leadership with rate relief measures for people in need. Average rate levels in Port Phillip are below those in Bayside, Melbourne and Yarra, and only slightly above those in Stonington. The residential rate base in Port Phillip is significantly smaller than Bayside, Stonington or Melbourne. More than 70% of residential properties in Port Phillip are valued at $1 million or less. Another 20% of properties are valued between $1 and $2 million. Council's proposed rating strategy in changing from NIV to CIV will advantage wealthier residential property owners. Owners of properties valued at $2 million and above will get substantial rate cuts, even without a rates freeze from this budget. Community services for people in need, the future of our childcare and early learning services, the future of our libraries and arts programs, and the urgency of renewing our social infrastructure should not be compromised in the quest for the ideological purity of a rates freeze. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, councillors, let's move on. So we're up to section 3, which is presentation of reports, and we'll move through each report paper. We have 3 to consider tonight. The first of which is item 3.1, which is the Enterprise Asset Management Plan. The executive member here is Chris Carroll, and questions will be answered by Mark Thompson and Joe McNeil. Councillors, are there any questions of the officers in relation to report 3.1? There being none, councillors, I'm looking for a mover or of the officer's recommendation or something different? Councillor Martin to move and Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Martin.
I'll try and be brief. There are bigger items coming up later. The Enterprise Asset Management Plan documents the key elements involved in managing Council's extensive asset base and assesses Council's performance in doing this. It's a pretty dry document, but it's a very informative read and informs the Council plan and the budget process in managing the upkeep of these assets long term. And when you see that there are 28 different key service plans and strategies in the document, it gives you some idea of the huge task involved in managing Council's assets. I also note there's a maturity assessment plan attached, and it appears that our Council's doing very well in managing these assets. So well done to our Council officers. So I thank the officers who've prepared the document and the members of the public who provided feedback.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Councillor Copsey, do you wish to speak to the item? Councillors, who else would like to speak for or against the recommendation that's been put by Councillor Martin? Councillor Martin, do you wish to close? I now put that to you to vote on. Councillors, those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Let's now move to item 3.2, which is the Don't Waste It! Waste Management Strategy for 2022 to 2025 and Rating Strategy 2022-2025. The executive member that created this report was Chris Carroll, and questions can be answered by Lachlan Johnson, Peter Liu or Marilyn Mathias. Question, Councillor Consolo.
Procedural question.
Go ahead.
We're taking this in parts, I believe. So do you want questions at each part or do you want them at the beginning for everything?
Happy to take for the whole report. So anything that's contained in 3.2 can be asked at this point, but happy, given the complexity of tonight's motions, happy to take clarifying questions at any point or questions at the point of we do the parts.
Thank you.
I'll make an announcement in a minute about how I'm going to treat the parts as well to make clarity for you. But questions in relation to any item in the report of 3.2, councillors? No? Okay. I'll just take you through procedurally what I'm doing here this evening, councillors, if I may. So, under our meeting procedures, section 33, the chair may separate motions or move en bloc. So there is no procedure per se for us to separate motions. There is a procedure for us to vote separately in parts. The way we've interpreted the rules this evening and the way I'm going to run it is I'm going to run each individual part that's been placed on the agenda in terms of the officer's recommendation or something else you would like to place in those parts as separate motions under the banner of the Regulation 33 as separate motions. So the heading says the chair may separate motions, and that's what I'm doing. And in the future, we'll clear up that procedure about how to separate a motion. So we're doing them as separate motions in parts. We're not voting on one motion in part. Any questions on that? No problem. Yeah, no worries. Councillors, a reminder, there's officers' alt-recs with individual numbers there to make your comments easier to refer to. All right, so this recommendation was published in parts to assist councillors in considering each section. We will now consider each part. Pardon me. Councillors, I asked you to take note that the items in red, this is the officer's alt-rec, which includes an update to the numbering primarily and clarity around separate budget report item at item 3.5. So any questions on the first part that I'm going to put to you now? There being no questions, I seek a mover and a seconder for part one. Thanks, Councillor Copsey, and thanks, Councillor Crawford, to second. Councillor Copsey.
I'll reserve.
Councillor Crawford.
I'm really excited to have got to this point after 6 years. It's taken a while, and I know our community has very much wanted this expansion in our waste services. So to finally be at, I mean, it's not exactly about to happen, but in the next this next year we are rolling out FOGO in different methods. Obviously, we're doing some communal services for some of our waste streams, but also then the curbside as well. So I just wanted to say I'm really excited to adopt this waste management strategy, especially where there has been so much movement and change, and I imagine that will continue in the waste space. So the constant adapting to those changes and tweaking our strategy, but to have got to this point is very exciting. So I hope the rest of my councillors support the adoption of this waste strategy.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Anyone else wish to speak to part one? Councillor Bond, go ahead.
I won't be supporting this. I think the move to fortnightly garbage collection is going to be a disaster. We saw that in Yarra where it didn't work. We saw that in Hobson's Bay where they actually reversed their decision within about 3 months. I don't think our community is fully aware that they're moving to fortnightly garbage collections just yet, and once it hits, I think there is going to be considerable feedback. I know we've done all we can to try and educate the community and try and communicate with them and let them know what's happening, but the reality is no one cares what we do here at Town Hall until it impacts them, and once we go to fortnightly garbage collection, it will impact them, and we will hear from them very strongly when that occurs. So I can't support this. It's one of the core functions of council is picking up the bin weekly from houses. One of the things that people pay all these rates. Well, I know we've got lots of people here tonight who love paying their rates. It's what that money should be spent on is the collection of garbage from houses, first and foremost. And if we can't do that weekly, well, there's something wrong with us as a council.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillors, anyone else wish to speak for or against Councillor Copsey's motion? Councillor Martin?
Happy to speak for the motion, Mayor, and I take on board Councillor Bond's comments. I believe that the motion as it stands is a reasonable motion. I believe that our community will be accepting of it. However, we do have the chance to review things further down the track, and if Councillor Bond's dire predictions are true, and I certainly hope that they won't be, and I believe they won't be, but if they were, we do have a chance to review this, so we're not locking ourselves into something for the next 10 years. We'll be able to come back here in 12 months' time, and hopefully we'll be able to tick off on something we've seen as being very successful. If Councillor Bond's predictions are correct, we'll be in a position to do something about it.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Mayor. I am supportive of the waste strategy per se, supportive of sustainability and the introduction of the new waste services such as FOGO and glass. The community has wanted these services for many years and we've completed many trials, so it is exciting to be able to actually roll it out. The properties, there's a smaller percentage of properties that are getting an additional waste bin for FOGO, and those that aren't are going to be relying on communal facilities. I think we're very much going to need the support of the community to utilise those communal facilities, or else it could be challenging, and we probably won't achieve the reduction in landfill that we're looking for if the community doesn't get behind the communal services. The move to fortnightly garbage collection services after 6 months will test our community, as I said, particularly for those that are having communal services and not the bins, which is very high in terms of what we're proposing for the waste strategy. So I think we will need to exercise some degree of flexibility when we see what the community's response is. If it is, as Councillor Bond predicts, then there could be some interesting conversations, but we do need to move forward with this and try to ensure we reduce our waste to landfill. So I do support the strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Just while we take a break, I'll speak to it. I'm happy to support part one, but to reiterate Councillor Bond's points, this is probably the biggest behavioural change that we're putting through our city in a long time, and the communication piece to this, regardless of how effective and how good we do it, will fall short for some people, and we need to make sure we do our very, very best we can to bring our community with us. And if we get this wrong, we need to respond accordingly quickly. So as a group of councillors, I think we need to take the risk that's detailed here in part one of this, but also be very open-minded about the potential consequence of the behavioural change we're asking people to do, work with people to make that change as accommodating as we possibly can, and hopefully it's more successful than some of the other recent examples in neighbouring municipalities. happy to support part 1 of this motion. Who else would like to speak to the item? Councillor Sirikoff, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also supportive of part 1. My only concerns are that down the road we may have to address rolling out this system to a greater proportion of the community. The current system will deliver curbside FOGO bins to 25% of the city of Port Phillip, while 75% will be looking at walking up to 300 metres to put their food and green waste into communal bins. And with that, I'm a bit concerned that while the apartments, that is the 75% of the community, will still have weekly landfill bins collected, and as Councillor Bond did mention, that the 25% of houses and terraces which will be going to fortnightly bins, it just seems not a good way to be incentivising those in apartments to also do the same thing, given that there will be a reduction of collection of landfill bins for that 25%. So I'm looking forward to this system being introduced, because we've got to start it. But I think there's going to be a bit of tweaking to make it fair for everybody, to get everybody on board, and to also reduce the cost of a landfill, of waste to landfill, with it increasing by some 60% over the past few years. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sirikoff. Deputy Mayor Baxter.
Look, I'll make it quick, but I just want to say that, like Councillor Crawford said, this has been something that's been in the works for a very, very long time, and the main impact this is going to have on people's lives is that people will actually have the option to take their FOGO rubbish either to the bin at their home, or the bin in the bin well at their apartment building, or potentially the communal bin at a park very close to them. And I personally am looking forward to that. I've been doing that for a while, but I've been taking it up to Hewison Reserve, which is, not a short walk from my place, but it's one of the trial locations. And it's going to be absolutely fantastic when that is at our fingertips and at everybody's fingertips, as well as the glass recycling as well.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Baxter. Councillor Consolo.
Thank you. I feel fortunate to see this roll out on my watch, but know it's going to be hard for us all to figure it out together, especially when we go to that fortnightly collection. I acknowledge the fear that people haven't done this before and that we need to figure it out, such as shellfish around holidays. It can be a bit worrisome. Council will need to see how people react, and we'll make adjustments as it comes, and residents too will have to figure out what works for them. Maybe it's taking out soft plastic that actually takes up a lot of space in bins that people might not do right now. That behaviour change can come. I think it's the right thing to get this FOGO bin out. The comments here tonight, whether that communal will work or fortnightly, we'll have to see. But it's a good step in the right direction for the next 3 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Consolo. Councillor Copsey, you to close.
Thank you. That's been very comprehensive. So all I'll say is that this was a hot topic when I was outdoor knocking, trying to seek election way back in 2016. Our community has been crying out for green waste service for very many years, and we had some road bumps in the last term, including the recycling crisis, which meant that this has taken us longer to get to this point than we hoped. I want to thank the community for bearing with us, and also for the really enthusiastic embrace that the community has shown towards all of our trials. That's really helped to inform the approach that we're taking here, and I'm very glad that we're finally at the point of adopting a green waste solution for our city. So looking forward to seeing it roll out.
Thanks, Councillor Copsey. I'll now put that motion. Those in favour? Those against? Motion carried.
Division required.
Oh, I'll give it to Councillor Bonds. Is that okay? Councillor Bonds called a division. Those in favour? Councillor Sirikoff, Councillor Copsey, Councillor Consolo, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Martin, Councillor Crawford, Deputy Mayor Baxter and Councillor Clark. Those against is Councillor Bonds. Now, any objections to merging Part 2 and 3 together, councillors? There being none, I'll give you another opportunity to ask questions on parts 2 or 3 or anything to do with 3.2.
Sorry, Mayor.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah.
To merge part 2 and 3?
Yes. I would.
You want to keep them separate?
Yes, please.
As in, yes, keep them separate.
Yes.
Okay, no worries. Happy to oblige. I'm looking for a mover to part 2. Officer's recommendation or something different. Councillor Martin, thank you for moving. Looking for a seconder. And Councillor Consolo, thank you very much. Councillor Martin, do you wish to speak to the item?
I do have actually written some notes. I'm sorry my speaking voice is bland. I'll try and make it as vital as possible. This rating strategy, with its shift from net annual value to capital improved value, along with the implementation of differential rates with 3 categories, commercial, industrial and residential, also along with the implementation of a tiered waste charge structure, makes a significant difference to the way that rates will be collected across our city. The shift from NAV to CIV allows Council to implement differential rates to ensure that the rates paid by the 3 categories of ratepayers, commercial, industrial and residential, are linked such that they can be tweaked so that the rates paid by one of the categories don't increase disproportionately when compared with the other categories. So in recent years, for example, the value of residential properties has on average increased at a significantly faster rate than those of the commercial industrial properties, and therefore there's been a consequent disproportionate increase in the amount of rates paid by residential properties. CIV allows Council to vary in the dollar rate such that the relative proportions of monies collected from these properties, residential properties, at a time when values are increasing, don't grow in comparison with the other rates, and we keep the relative proportions of the rates collected from these 3 areas comparable. So for 22-23, this will mean a relative reduction in the residential rates in comparison to rates collected from the industrial and commercial sectors. The introduction of a tiered waste charge means that owners of single-unit dwellings will all pay the same waste charge for the same service, as will owners of multi-unit dwellings. And therefore, basically, we have a user-pays scenario for our collection of waste charges. The introduction of this rating strategy has 2 outcomes. 1, a relative decrease in the income received from residential ratepayers in comparison to ratepayers in the other sectors. And 2, a flattening out of the residential rate structure. If property values didn't change between January 21 and January 22, the net effect would be that all residential property owners of properties of a value below $600,000 would pay slightly more in rates for the next financial year as a result of the new fixed waste charge, while those in properties valued at more than $600,000 would pay less. And the higher the value of the property, the greater the reduction in the rates. If we do go for an increase in rates to somewhere between 0% and the 1.75% rate cap, and that will come up in a later motion, even with an increase in the rate cap, then my understanding is that for most properties valued over $1 million, they should see quite a significant reduction in their rates from 2021-22 to 22-23, with some ratepayers at the high end of the scale seeing very, very significant reductions in their rates. So these are the implications of the rate strategies. We've been out to consultation. People are clear on what it means. There is some discussion in the debates that I've been involved with where people have been arguing for and against these strategies. I sit with some concern that the flat waste charge can be seen to be slightly regressive in that it does reduce some of the rates paid by some of our more owners of homes that are more expensive. On the other hand, given that we all use exactly the same waste services, it does implement a user-pay system and perhaps increases the incentive for people to use our waste program effectively. So it's taken me some time to get my head around whether I can support a very slightly regressive charge, which was with this low rate charge, which I note stays within the overall rate cap. There is no suggestion that this waste charge will increase our rates beyond any rate cap, but I believe that occasionally, for example, we all pay the same when we catch the tram, we all pay the same when we go to the theatre, and perhaps if we all pay the same for our rubbish, then there's probably a justification for a flat charge while we still keep the differential rates. Let me get my words right here. So a very small component of our rates for most people, the waste charge will be a flat charge, but we still keep the progressive rate charge for most of the other rates that we receive. And as was pointed out by a number of our speakers, those of us who are fortunate enough to own homes of a much higher value, I believe, do have a moral obligation to provide a little bit more support to our colleagues who perhaps aren't as well off as us. But the end result of this, as I've noted, is that those people who are currently sitting in homes where they're paying $4,000, $6,000, $8,000 in rates, they will see a very significant reduction in their rates for the next financial year.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Councillor Consolo.
Thank you. These four items together collectively make our rating strategy. So that's a big change this year. And residents might not notice too much between net annual value and capital improvement value or the differential ratings. But if we don't have those differential ratings, for example, like last year, you can see where big property shifts can fall onto the residents. So that's going to be able to help there. I also believe in the separate waste charge as that direct waste private use the user pays. So I'm supportive of that one. And it does have a shift. We will see that this property market has had, the single houses have gone up very high and the rates have gone with it. And some of those units at the bottom end have sat there at the same. Some have gone down over years. So when we say every year that things get more expensive, that's not necessarily been felt evenly as well. So this does bring it back into a little bit, just taking off the edge on that a little bit. I do acknowledge that that will, at a hard time, put a little bit more expense, take more out of people's pockets at the lower end, but I think that that's also where we have to balance it back out. The last item I want to talk about is the tiered waste system. Given in part one that we've just gone through entails that there's a FOGO rollout to single unit developments only in this financial year. The rest is more after in July 2023, next financial year. And collection remains at a weekly, rubbish collections weekly. These residents are benefiting. Now they have a whole new service, and they're the only ones who are getting it, and there's no change to their waste already. So that's where I was thinking that the tiered waste service for this year, that additional $88.10 for those properties makes a lot of sense. Now, in 23-24, when we see these other ones come through, the communal and the MUDs, all the other ones come out, we might look at, and then go to fortnightly, we might look at, is that tiered system the right option? And we have that option to look at the next budget cycle, whether we go to a flat rate or to stay in a tier. So I think that's really important to point out that those collectively are going to, people are going to see a difference, and we acknowledge that. And my reasons I've given already for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Consolo. Who else would like to speak in favour or against the motion that Councillor Martin has put? Councillor Bond, go ahead.
I won't be supporting this either. Particularly concerning here is the fact we're introducing a separated waste charge, a bin tax for all intents and purposes. And I know we're one of the last councils in Melbourne to do this, but one of the reasons people pay their rates as opposed to other forms of fees and charges is so that council goes around and cleans the streets and empties their bins and picks up their rubbish. Over the years, and that's how it started 150 years ago when rates were first introduced in this state. And over the years, council spends its money on so many other areas that we've pretty much run out of money to pay for the collection of bins from houses. So, and I realise we're one of the last councils in Melbourne to do this, so congratulate us on being one of the last to run out of money in Melbourne. I think it's only 6 or 7 of us that don't have it. But the reality is the fact we've had to bring in a separate waste charge to complete a core function of council that was primarily meant to be paid for by people paying their rates is not a good outcome, in my opinion. Also concerns me tonight, I've heard a speaker was pulled up for saying that this waste charge can't go up by any amount possible. And Councillor Martin said that before, but the reality is we might have a commitment here to say that it won't, but a future council can put this fee up by any amount it likes. They can decide that it's not going up by 1.75 next year, it'll go up by 10, as we've seen with other councils. Other councils across the state have put their waste charges up by 5, 10, 15. I think one of them, Monash, put it up by 20, and there was a massive blowback against them for doing that. So once this is outside the rate charge, it is true to say that this could go up by any amount the council chooses to put it up. And I certainly hope that's not the case. I certainly hope it goes up by no more than the average rate increase, but the experiences in other councils says that just is not how it plays out over time. So, unfortunately, I just think this is a bad outcome for our city, so I won't be supporting this bin tax.
Thanks, Councillor Bond. Councillor Sirikoff.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm supportive of council moving from CIV to NAV. Sorry, I'm supportive of the council moving from NAV to CIV.
Let's get your
NAV.
Perhaps, Councillor Sirikoff, could we put the level up a bit? Just a little. It's on, right? Yeah, it's on.
Testing? Is that
there we
okay?
go. That's a little bit better. Thanks,
so let me
Councillor
start
Sirikoff.
again. I'm supportive of council moving from NAV to CIV with differential rating. This will provide council with levers to balance the rates and to reduce cost shifting between property classes, which was the case this financial 21-22 year with revenue cost shift of 4.5% from commercial and industrial properties to residential properties. However, the waste charge is a different matter, and I am disappointed that the shift to CIV and the waste charge have been bundled together in this part too. I'm very much in favour of the curbside FOGO bins by voting up Part 1 earlier on, and I'd like to have seen curbside FOGO bins being delivered across the entire municipality. The waste charge is proposed to sit outside the rates cap, and will be for this financial 22-23 financial year will be cost neutral. Thereafter, we will be possibly seeing rate increases on that waste charge. The waste charge is not subject to capping, as is the general rates, with a purpose to protect the ratepayer from blowout rate increases. In the budget papers, the waste charge is proposed to increase by 6% in 23-24 and 10% in 24 and 25. And can go high because the waste charge does sit outside the rates cap. And also, as Councillor Bond mentioned, some councils has gone 10, 15, 20%. Without some form of capping, this waste charge is seeking to raise a further $25 million from the ratepayers over the next 10 years outside the rates cap, when the collection of rubbish is a core service of council. In February of this year, Council ran extensive deliberative consultation with the community on rates and waste charges. While only 41% supported a separate waste charge, an underwhelming 24% supported a tiered waste charge. I'm not supportive of the introduction of a core service being separated out as an extra charge to residents, and which a waste charge which has no financial constraints. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sirikoff. Who else wishes to speak in favour or against this motion? Councillor Crawford, go ahead.
So glad we're talking about this part, because I think it's kind of exciting, and I think it addresses some of the concerns that people have mentioned tonight. This rating strategy is delivering on two particular outcomes that we have heard concerns or wants from our community. One is to deliver a broader waste service, and so that's part of it. And then the other is around reducing the burden of rates to community, or redistributing it, because people are concerned that some are paying very high rates, and that's the particular peculiarity of a municipality that has 70% or 60% flats compared to houses, and some are rising in value much more than the other. So this is a really exciting moment. This rating strategy actually delivers on both of those things. The rates that we collect overall don't cover all of what we provide, and there's no way we could add in waste. We're lucky that we have other revenue sources as a municipality and can provide more services and great amenity and all of that. But let's get clear, our $140 approximately $1 million that we would levy in rates does not cover most of our various services and the things that we've all grown to love and expect. There's a lot of expectation in our community that we'll have nice parks and playgrounds and all the like. So what this waste charge, by separating it, does, and I want to point out it's a partial waste charge. It does not recoup all of the costs, particularly for FOGO, which is far and above the most expensive thing that we'll be delivering for our community in waste. But by separating this waste charge and going to CIV. This is the only way we can actually make a big dent in that redistribution of rates to different property types, from flats or the lower value properties to the higher value properties. Doing them on their own won't deliver the outcome that we've heard tonight some people in our community care about: cheaper rates. The separating from the waste charge from it's a hard thing to explain, but when I've had conversations with people in the community about it, they go, "Oh, I understand what you're trying to do." It's an imperfect system. But by separating the waste charge and making it more flat across the municipality, you're reducing the actual amount that the CIV, that the rating equation is applied. So we're reducing from 139 down to 125. So the amount of rates that will be levied on the properties is smaller than it has been before. So that, in adjustment with the differentials in our new CIV rating system, will give the biggest bang, the biggest reduction in rates that ratepayers say they're so concerned about, or some ratepayers, let's get really clear. So this is actually a rating strategy that's been well thought out. Yes, we did do consultation with the community. Unfortunately, we didn't have huge response, and we didn't get any statistical significant majority or outcomes that would definitively really represent our community. But we do know two things. There are some people who are interested in reducing rates, and there are a lot of people who are interested in having good outcomes for our community and having an expanded waste service. And some of those special interest groups that want this kind of change is they want a rating system that might be a little bit more even, but they want an expanded waste system, but they also want access to good parks, to a lovely foreshore, childcare, maternal health, vaccinations, all those special interest groups that really want safe bike lanes or roads, all those special interest groups who, care about the arts and the traders on Ackland and Fitzroy. All those special groups want much more for our community, and this rating strategy will deliver for most of them. All those hospitality workers and business owners, music venues, not-for-profit organisations, sporting groups, all the things that they want council to deliver, this rating strategy allows us to do it. So I'm really hope councillors will support it, because this way we deliver for some people in the community who are concerned about lower rates, but we also deliver for the majority of the community who actually want good services, an expanded waste system, and a council area that cares about the more vulnerable and all of the other great things in life that make this municipality so wonderful. So I highly commend this new rating strategy to you.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Who else would like to speak to Councillor Martin's motion? Hey, Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm supportive of the change from NAV to CIV. I think this is a good change that introduces, different property classes and rating system. It'll allow council to adjust the rates to ensure that there's not a negative outcome for one property versus another, property class, I should say, if we have significant variations across those property movements. I think it is a simpler method, and I think once the community understands that, I think that will be a positive for the community as well. While I spoke to the previous part one being supportive of the waste strategy, I am not supportive of a waste levy being introduced. Waste services and rubbish collection are the absolute fundamentals of council and basic services that residents expect to be provided out of the rates that they pay. The waste levy is just another tax and a levy, or whatever you wish to call it, another charge on residents. We're being asked to pay $176 and an additional $88 if you have a curbside FOGO bin. The biggest concern, aside from the introduction of a new tax for residents, is the levy is not subject to the state government rate cap and can be increased by whatever increase the council or councillors determine each year. I also note of a lesser concern is that the waste levy for next year is being charged for the whole year on some services that are not being delivered till halfway through the year, and the communal services are not until July 2023. But overall, I cannot support another tax or levy on residents that is a fundamental core service that should be provided by council out of our rates, has historically always been provided out of rates, although noting other councils have moved to a waste levy. And when you have to stack up how this council spends a significant amount of revenue with all the special interests and all the projects, we all want a nice community. But if you have to then work out which ones are the priorities, surely rubbish and rates, rubbish and waste services has to be at the top of the list that should be first funded out of rates. So I won't be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Who else would like to speak for or against Councillor Martin's motion? Go ahead, Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. I just wanted to note some of the points that were made in the public submissions around the equity issues associated with some of these shifts. So I acknowledge that there are regressive elements from the shift to CIV, and through the flattish nature of waste charge, I think those are regrettable. However, there are also benefits from CIV, including the differential rating ability, which is, you know, makes this a justifiable shift, in my opinion. One of the biggest challenges of the state government capping rates for councils is that there are a number of areas in which the costs of quality service provision are far exceeding council's ability now to collect rates in order to fund those. And waste is an excellent example of of an issue where the cost of disposing of waste to landfill is growing exorbitantly, and that provides a real challenge for communities all across our state in continuing to provide a high quality service when we're operating in this rates capped environment. So that's one of the reasons that we'll be joining the majority of councils in separating this out, so that we can provide a much enhanced service as well from this point forward, which has been asked for many years from the community. But I'll just make the point that one of the best ways for us to keep the costs of our waste under control is to rapidly reduce the amount of waste going to landfill, and to also ensure that we are, as much as possible, sorting our waste and resources in Port Phillip, so as much of it can be recovered as possible. So the shift that we've just adopted will help us to do that, and it's certainly something that I hope councillors will be assisting with communication on, so that we can actually get these costs more under control, as well as delivering a superior set of services for a community on this point into the future. And finally, just as mentioned, there is, of course, that concern around the regressive nature of a flat charge. So I'm pleased that we're looking at the tiered charge. I think it in some ways ameliorates that impact, and that's why I'll be supporting it tonight.
Thanks, Councillor Copsey. Who else would like to speak for or against Councillor Martin's motion? Councillor Martin, do you wish to close?
Thank you, Mayor. When I decided to run for council 2 years ago, or just over 2 years ago, the main thing that I heard about was rates. People wanted to talk about rates. Either that council should raise more money and provide more things to the community, or that we were charging too much for rates and we weren't delivering. So certainly I got the message loud and clear that rates were a very large issue. In the lead up to the first budget, I think I had something like 350 emails from people who were saying that particularly in areas, in some of the wealthier parts of Port Phillip, people were saying that the level of rates that they were paying were quite extreme, that they believed that council was levying rates unfairly on them, they weren't getting value for money, and that as a council it was my duty to find ways of reducing the level of rates that they were paying. So clearly rates are an issue out there, and clearly we as a council we need to make sure that we can show our community what we're doing with our rates, so that we can convince people that they're getting value for money. In the middle of all this, though, we've had an opportunity to review our rating structure to try and address the concerns, particularly of those people who are perhaps property rich, asset rich and cash poor. And the change from NAV to CIV is one way of going about that, by looking at a more equitable distribution of rates between residential ratepayers and those in commercial and industrial, and that will automatically have an effect of slightly reducing the amount of rates that our residential ratepayers will be paying in this community. And at the same time, with the introduction of FOGO, it gave us a chance to review the way that we're looking at our waste charges. And as I said, I had long arguments with myself in the middle of the night about the regressive nature, in some fact, of a small rate charge, but at the same time, the importance of sometimes showing people that there is a user pays approach to things. And as Councillor Copley just mentioned earlier, if we can show very clearly that we are levying a rates charge, it's an incentive for people to make sure that they're using their rates and or to find better ways of disposing of their materials so that we can perhaps reduce the overall charges, reduce the overall expenses that council spends on rates. So reduce the overall expense that council makes on waste and therefore be able to reduce the amount of money that we levy on our ratepayers to remove that waste. I take issue with what Councillor Bond said earlier. We can't afford to run our waste, so we're introducing a waste charge as an additional charge because we couldn't afford to to remove our waste effectively. I hope I'm not paraphrasing you incorrectly, Councillor. We've been very, very clear that the waste charge that we're introducing this year sits within the rates cap. There will be no overall increase beyond the rates cap in the rates revenue that we raise from the City of Port Phillip. That we're looking at a tiered waste charge so that those people who aren't accessing the full service that someone in a single unit dwelling, they'll be paying less if they're in a multiple unit dwelling. And so that that's reducing to some extent the mildly regressive nature of the rates charge. And then last but not least, this has the effect of flattening out the rates charge across the whole of the municipality. And those people who were most vocal when I was running for council 2 years ago, who were saying, look, I'm paying $6,000, I'm paying $4,000, I'm paying $8,000, and I don't think I'm getting value for money, they will find a significant reduction in their rates. Now, Councillor Clark and Councillor Sirikoff have raised the issue of if the waste charge is set outside the rates cap, then future councils could decide to increase the rates charge by $5,000 a head or $10,000. They could do anything they wanted to. And yes, councils could. But councils would only do what their community would want them to do. And if the community didn't want council to set a waste charge that sat outside the... So if the community didn't want council to set a waste charge that would sit outside the rates cap, they would probably find themselves in some difficulty at election time. So conversely, if council didn't introduce a waste charge at this time, another council further down the track could always do that. So our decision tonight, if we carry this motion, is to introduce a waste charge that sits inside the rates cap, whatever that's going to be, for the 2022-23 financial year, and future councils can decide what they want to do with a waste charge, regardless of whether we introduce one tonight or whether they decide to introduce one in the future. But we're being very clear for 22-23 that sits within the rates cap, and that future councils can do whatever they think their community thinks best. But at the moment, I think there are good outcomes for everyone across the community, and best of all, of course, we're going to have FOGO in the next 12 months.
Councillors, item 3.2, part 2, I'll put that under division, and I'll put the motion under division. Those in favour, Councillor Copsey, Councillor Consolo, Councillor Martin, Councillor Crawford, Deputy Mayor Baxter. Those against, Councillors Bond, Sirikoff, Pearl and Clark. The motion is carried. Let's now move to part 3. There's no further questions, so I'm looking for a mover or a seconder. Councillor Copsey to move part 3 and Councillor Crawford to second. Thank you, Councillor Copsey.
I don't wish to speak to this one.
Councillor Crawford. Who else would like to speak? Come on, you want me to put this? Councillor Sirikoff, Councillor Clark? You didn't want me to combine it, so... No? Okay. All right. Anyone wish to close? Anyone wish to speak? Councillor Copsey? No problem. I put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Let's have a break. See you back at 25 minutes past 8. All right, councillors. Just one thing I'll clarify before. I read out something by Stephen Pennells before, which was a bit convoluted, and it did come through officers. but the comments, I should have cautioned myself when I was reading them out, because it did say that our gardens were being devastated by rate cuts, which factually isn't correct. I'm holding a pretty low bar tonight, so I should have pulled myself up on that one. So I beg your forgiveness on that item. And in relation to the other pull-up, I was pulling up on the point not that council couldn't change the rate, but officers cannot change the rate, just to be clear of what was stated before. So officers have no direct authority over changing any of the rates. We do.
Point of clarification, Mayor. Does that mean you have two more opportunities before you have to finish up?
Two more opportunities?
Two more cautions?
Oh, for myself? Yeah. I'll allow you to keep me honest for that. All right, councillors, welcome to item 3.3 tonight. Questions of the officers? I seek a mover and a seconder for part 1 of item 3.3. Councillor Martin to move, Deputy Mayor Baxter to second. Go ahead, Councillor Martin.
So again, I've made a couple of notes. So firstly, can I thank our council officers for the many hours of work that they've put into putting the budget documents together, and the many community members who've had input into the process. Now, I note that in the motion we are acknowledging, let me get my words right here, the improved financial forecast of $2.81 million, which brings the forecast cumulative cash surplus to $5.27 million for 2021-22. So, congratulations to the council officers on delivering us that situation. I also then noticed that there are a number of dot points that talk about where this has come from, and things, for example, that we didn't need to pay out as much money in hardship support to people, that we didn't have as many rental waivers. There's been a significant decrease in the council staffing, so we've been able to save a whole lot of money in wages. And then there are a whole lot more dot points that in the officer's report, from 4.62 all the way through to, I think, 4.69, which detail all the other things that have happened in Port Phillip since the draft budget came out. There have been all sorts of major changes in forecasts, and the budget that we're looking at tonight has incorporated these changes because of all the things that have happened. So, given the uncertain times that we're in, I think it's fantastic that our officers have been able to get together this improved budget situation, because I think we're probably going to need every cent of that over the next 12 months as we face some very, very uncertain times with uncertainty about where our revenue is going to come from, even more uncertainty with our expenditure. For example, building costs are going to increase dramatically. Who knows where we're going to go with our EBAs for staffing costs and so on. So I just note that while accepting the officer's report here, we also note that we are looking at some very, very uncertain times, and I might speak more to that when we look at some of the other motions later on.
Deputy Mayor Baxter. No. Who else would like to speak for or against Councillor Martin's motion? Councillor Martin, do you wish to close? Okay, now put that motion. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Let's now move to part 2. I seek a mover of the officer's recommendation or something else. Councillor Martin to move, Councillor Crawford to second. Councillor Martin, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I do. Again, I've made some notes as we talk about the proposed rate cap. So way back in 2016, the Victorian government introduced rate capping to restrict the amount that councils can raise their rates by each year. The rate cap is set each year by the Minister for Local Government, and for 22-23, the rate cap for us has been set at a maximum 1.75%. The state's independent umpire, the Essential Services Commission, can grant councils an exemption to raise rates above the cap. Obviously, our council's decided that it won't be trying to seek that. The rate cap applies to the percentage increase in a council's average general rate and municipal charge, but it does not necessarily apply to each individual property owner's rate notice. That depends on the property valuation and whether we're using NAV, CIV, whether there are rate charges, all the things that we've spoken about earlier. Since the rate cap for 22-23 was mandated at 1.75%, economic circumstances in Victoria have changed dramatically. At the time that the 1.75% rate cap was mandated at the end of last year, CPI for Australia in the previous 12 months had been 2.2%. So the rate cap was effectively set at 0.45% below the CPI that was current at the time. The most recent figures released by the ABS have the annual CPI increase for the year ended March 31st, 2022 at 5.1%. So our rate cap at the moment is 3.35% below where CPI is, with many financial institutions predicting the annual CPI could rise to at least 7% by the end of 2022, even if this motion for having a 1.7 by utilising the full 1.75% rate cap is accepted, there are still going to be some major financial challenges facing our council. The immediate impact of CPI increases will be felt by council in its major areas of expenditure, for example, salaries and in the cost of goods and services. In particular, costs in the construction industry are predicted to rise by over 15% over the next 12 months compared to where they are at the moment. Without a reduction in council services and or the identification of efficiencies in the delivery of council services, there is a strong likelihood that council will need to dip into its reserves to fund its 2022-23 program, even if we do accept this motion that is arguing for a 1.75% rate increase. Any reduction in this rate cap would have a negative impact on council's ability to deliver its services to the community over 22-23. My last observations are perhaps more personal. I've received many emails in recent weeks from residents arguing that council should either, many people, A, impose a rate freeze, or B, implement a full 1.75% rate cap. In almost all of the correspondence I've received, both for and against the implementation of a 1.75% rate cap, the arguments have been ideological rather than discussing the relative merits of the various programs that council implements. After going through the budget papers thoroughly, I personally have been unable to identify any particular budget lines where it's obvious to me that council could make savings by modifying or removing a particular program. But that's not to say they don't exist, but we don't seem to have looked to them particularly thoroughly. The budget consultation process is the time that councils and residents have the opportunity to argue the case for adding or removing programs or increasing or decreasing the funding for particular items in the budget. Almost all submissions argued either for one or more additional programs being funded or simply a blanket freeze on council's expenditure with no identification of programs which could have been either removed or cut back. I would hope that in future budget processes we pay more attention to the relative merits of the individual budget lines in determining what's included in the budget and less attention to arguments in favour of nominating a particular percentage rate spending cap. Having said that, I don't believe that we can maintain our existing council programs without having the current 1.75% proposal for maximising the rate cap for 22-23. So I commend the increase, the 1.75% increase to you all.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Councillor Crawford.
Just briefly, I'm happy to support the 1.75% rate cap for a number of reasons. One, in our 10-year financial plan, not everything is funded fully, and we know that there are some big projects and risks coming at us. So the idea that we can afford to not take a rates cap in order to deliver all the many things that we know our community want is unrealistic and irresponsible. Two, we actually, through our rating strategy, have delivered an opportunity for rates reduction in the higher value properties in our municipality. So we are delivering what some people have asked for through a different mechanism, but still delivering. And three, given the inflation rate and the increase in particularly construction costs and staffing costs in a very tight market, I think we need to be responsible financial managers, giving ourselves room to move with not knowing exactly what the next year will bring financially.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Who else would like to speak for or against Councillor Martin's motion? Councillor Martin, do you wish? No? Councillor Sirikoff. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 years down the road, and hopefully we are on the tail end of a pandemic. But our residents, our community and local businesses are still hurting from the huge negative impacts of COVID-19, which has been financially and mentally stressful and devastating for businesses and residents alike. Just when we thought we were coming out of a pandemic, our residents are now facing the skyrocketing costs of living expenses due to rising inflation, which has the effect of rising mortgage rates and interest rates, increased energy costs, which will affect all sectors of the country, increased petrol prices, the cost of destructive storm events, increasing the price of food, and also the far-reaching economic effects of the war in Ukraine. The cost of everything is going up, and the forecast is for the economy to get worse before it gets better. Despite a pandemic, during the past 2 budget meetings, Council chose not to freeze rates and to give ratepayers some financial relief when trying to meet their household bills. During that time, residents were hurting because they had either lost their jobs or their wages had gone backwards. Many businesses collapsed while others struggled to stay open, and still they can't find enough staff. Look at the number of shops that have closed on our high streets while people are not spending like they used to. To make matters worse, rates in the city of Port Phillip are excessive when compared to other LGAs, and this is because the rates are based on a higher base. For 21-22, the rates for a medium price house of $1.7 million in the city of Port Phillip was $3,245, which is 56% more than rates for a $1.7 million property in Stonington, 22% more than the rates of the same valued property in Glenara, and 34% more than the rates for a similar priced property in Bayside. And the rates for these 3 other councils include weekly landfill bins, fortnightly green bins, optional food bins, and between 1 to 4 free residential parking permits. While Council sees the financial gains of rates increases through compound growth of the rates, this compound growth of rates places more hardship on our ratepayers as each year passes. And Council's high rates make up a substantial part of people's household budgets, noting that very few people were eligible for the hardship rates waiver this year. Again, property rich and cash poor. A rate freeze does not mean that Council will not receive rates from the ratepayers. It means that Council will receive the same amount of money as the current financial year but without an increase, no different to a resident's wages. People will still be required to pay rates. At last year's budget, we had a $4.4 million cash surplus, and in tonight's budget there is a $5.27 cash surplus and a $1.5 million surplus going forward for 22-23. The budget papers includes not only rates from existing properties, but also includes an additional $1 million from 585 new properties. A rate freeze, or at least a rates rebate of $2.3 million, could have been considered from the $1 million from the new property rates, plus $1 million from the cash surplus, and the remainder from the unexpected unused rates waiver. As I said last year, rates revenue comes out of residents' pockets, and we are spending someone else's money. And savings found should be given back to ratepayers when they continue to be living in financial and demanding times. I welcome to hearing back from residents who see that their rates are still unaffordable. I will not be supporting the 1.75% rates increase.
Thanks, Councillor Sirikoff. Who else would like to speak to this item? Councillor Clark, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. I cannot support another rate increase on our residents, particularly after COVID and now with the very significant cost of living pressures being felt across so many of our residents in all areas of life, it seems, at the moment. Rates in the City of Port Phillip are already very high, and we need to provide rate relief and downward pressure on rates rather than the level of expenditure we are supporting for next year's budget. What is lost in this budget tonight is that this is the residents' money, and they already fund the City of Port Phillip to provide considerable funding and budget for all the necessary service that we currently provide, and that's homeless services, aged care, childcare, it's arts festivals and all these other things. And we're happy to provide a level of funding for all of those things. But there has to be a limit. It is not an endless bucket of money for council and special interest groups to spend because we want a wonderful community. We all want a wonderful community, and I would argue we have a wonderful community. Many of the speakers tonight, and we've heard in many other council meetings, are asking for money because they believe their project is the one that needs funding and needs support, because their project is going to make the community even more wonderful. But a lot of these projects, they're asking for this money because it's funded by council. But council has to prioritise what it funds money on, and there are many other services that we all would agree are absolutely essential and required by council to fund, to support the vulnerable, to support the needy, to provide the rates and the rubbish and the parks and the gardens. But we're a long way away from the funding just those things with all the other things we fund in this community. So it's not unreasonable of residents to ask for some relief and balance the approach better between the residents who might already feel they've supported the community to provide for all the things we currently do provide, and created a community that is a sought-after place to live. So the approach between those residents who already provide this and the fact that they might want to keep some of their money to fund their own mortgage, their children's needs and pay their bills. It's not one or the other. We have to find a balance here between the rates that we're charging and all the services that we already provide, which does provide for a great community. And it's not necessarily going to be an even better community because we provide another $50,000 for this and another $30,000 for that. If it becomes unaffordable to live here, then that's not in anyone's interest, and nor is it going to create a diverse society. So we need to, as a council, take a stand on this, and I won't be supporting this rate rise again.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Councillor Bond, do you wish to speak?
Believe it or not, I don't actually support rate capping. I think we're a level of government. We're elected by the people, and rightly or wrongly, the 9 of us all sit here. And we should have the autonomy to put rates up whatever amount we feel we need to do in order to best manage our municipality. And if that happens to be, if we need 10% one year and none the next, well, we should have the right as a group of councillors to do that. So this rate capping that's been imposed on us, we'll be fine because we're a inner city municipality. We're quite wealthy. But there are other councils out there that are absolutely being devastated because they don't have the sources of revenue, the rivers of gold that we do here at the city of Port Phillip. And I've often suggested to many people that I understand why rates cap was brought in, because many councils out there used to put rates up every year after year, 5, 6, 7, 8%, and that was it, regardless of what inflation was. When inflation was 1, 2%, rates always went up 6, 7, 8%. And eventually, state government had enough of it and said, all right, we're going to put in rate capping. So it's partially our fault. The approach I would take is to put some sort of appendix or addition to the Local Government Act that clearly defines what local government can and cannot spend money on. And that would address a lot of the concerns that our community have with the wisdom of and the areas in which we spend money. So if we got rid of this rates cap, which is devastating many councils out there, and brought in guidelines or restrictions or an appendix or something to the Local Government Act that said here's what you can and can't spend money on, we could do away with this rate cap and we would have the autonomy back to put rates up whatever it is we want. I won't be supporting this 1.75% because I just don't think it's necessary. We are, as I said before, a very wealthy council, as well as our rates, which are reasonably high. Yeah, we do have 7 kilometres of beaches, which Stonington and Glen Ira don't have, but that's by the by. But we also have $30 million a year in parking revenue. We have $1 million a year in footpath trading revenue, which we're going to be reintroducing shortly in this particular budget, which I don't necessarily support either. But there's reasons why a rate rise here is not necessary, and we would not have to cut a single service. And I genuinely believe that. And I don't think I've ever opposed any spending within the city of Port Phillip on core services of council. I've never opposed cleaning. I've always been the biggest supporter of additional cleaning of our municipality. strong supporter of things that aren't necessarily council's role, like the Common Ground facility in Wellington Street, because that is going to have a very good outcome on certain areas of our municipality with homeless and disadvantaged people. This premise that if we don't put it up 1.75%, suddenly services are going to be cut, and they wheel out Meals on Wheels and all these other things that, no, we wouldn't have to touch any of them if we just showed a little bit of economic restraint as a municipality. If we stop spending money outside our municipality, a few of the reviews and things that we're very quick to jump on, which cost us a fortune in staff and consultants, and we get a report back that goes onto a bookshelf. That's the sort of expenditure that we should be cutting, not the core and essential services of this municipality, not our parks and gardens, not our libraries or anything like that. They would not need to be touched. We could do all that without actually and without touching any of those things, and I don't think a single person in this municipality would notice if we as a group of councillors showed that restraint and didn't put rates up year after year after year. But unfortunately, we've never been able to do that in my time on council. We've come close a couple of times, but there's always the will to spend is always greater than the will to not spend in these chambers. But that's life, I guess, as a City of Port Phillip councillor. So I won't be supporting this. I think we can manage a zero rates rise and not cut a single dollar worth of programs in our city, and no one would notice if we did have a targeted campaign of savings and expenditure reductions in areas that are just completely unnecessary, and we could please both groups that came along tonight. So I won't be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Who else would like to speak to the item? Deputy Mayor Baxter, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I thank all of my fellow councillors for their contributions, and I do think that although some of us may disagree quite a lot on what the role of local government is or what the role of taxation is, I think that the contributions and putting it out here in the public is still very valuable, just so that our community gets a really good understanding of what the different types of driving philosophies we have on this council and how we make our decisions. I note that Councillor Sirikoff referenced the sort of economically straitened times that we're in at the moment. Obviously, just coming out of not even coming out of COVID, so COVID hasn't gone anywhere, has it? But it's sort of coming out of lockdowns, I suppose. And with the war in Ukraine having such a massive global impact, what we do know, and what we have literally, more than 100 years of data all over the world in all sorts of different areas, is that during times of economic hardship, austerity is the worst thing to do. Cutting back on government spending, that makes economic depressions and recessions worse, and leads to a spiralling outcome. What we need is government intervention. We need governments who are willing to put investment into the community and to support them through the hard times, and that means using the redistributive power of taxation to make that happen. That's why I support us, rather than cutting our services, rather than limiting or reducing our role in the community, we need to actually increase it, or at the very least maintain it, in these difficult times. And I acknowledge Councillor Bond thinks we can do that while also limiting revenue. I disagree. I also note that Councillor Sirikoff referred to people in our community in hardship, and that's almost certainly has been the case over the past couple of years, whether they be people who own property or people who don't own property. What we did institute in the last budget was a hardship program that was generously funded and had easy to understand and easy to meet eligibility criteria for those people who were undergoing hardship. And what we found was that it wasn't particularly well subscribed. People were able to pay their rates, people were not generally in a position where their hardship was so bad that they were unable to pay their rates, or even there's really no evidence to show that the eligibility criteria were too harsh or that people weren't aware of the hardship program. It was very widely advertised. People actually, I guess, in this area, those people who had access to the hardship program, which is only landowners, only ratepayers, must have felt that they had enough wealth to be able to see these difficult times out. That hardship program did not in any way benefit renters or people who didn't own land. I should make that really clear here. So I think what we found was that landowners, ratepayers, were doing okay, or okay enough. Probably couldn't say the same for renters or people who didn't have that level of wealth. Whether that continues to remain the same as we go forward with interest rates going up and stuff like that, that will certainly remain to be seen. But I go back to saying that requires a bigger role for government, and I am going to be very, very supportive of anything we can do to support any member of our community, whether they own land or don't, in helping them through these difficult times. Councils' prices are are also going to rise as well. I've heard some comments about how we compare our rates to other councils. There's always a difficulty when that happens, and that's been alluded to when we were talking about the separate waste charge. And Councillor Bond referred to the fact that we're one of only a few councils that have not separated out the waste charge from rates. And that means that if you just simply compare our rates to the rates of a neighbouring council and you don't include their waste charge, and ours does include a waste charge, you will, of course, get really lopsided numbers. But they are not telling you the full story. They're not helpful when it comes to actually comparing to other municipalities. And honestly, they're not useful. You can just throw those comparisons in the bin. You need to compare apples to apples. But in the end, when we are looking at the role that rates play in our community, it is a form of taxation on land, on wealth, on property. And what we do is we collect that money along with a whole bunch of other money. Councillor Bond refers to rivers of gold. I'm not sure I'd call them rivers of gold necessarily, but certainly we make more from parking revenue and things like that than many other councils. But we take all of that money and we put it directly into the community for everyone, regardless of whether they own land or not. And if we were to do the opposite, if we were to freeze rates or we were to even cut rates, what we'd then have to do is we'd then have to take that money back out of those services that benefit the whole community and return it only to those who own land. And that, I think, is a very regressive and unfair thing to do, generally, when it comes to representing our entire community. I do think that our officers have done an excellent job and continue to do an excellent job in finding efficiencies. I note that Councillor Bond referred to some things that he thought we might be able to do better, and I know that the officers are always working on how we can do things better. When it comes to staff, we are simultaneously asked to reduce staff and also reduce reliance on consultants. The problem is you bring in consultants to replace your lost capacity and capability that you had because you have reduced your staff. So you can't really have both. You either bring things in-house and make sure that your council has the capacity to deliver those things, or you outsource it to consultants. You can't really do neither unless you want to do a poor job. And that's really what we're coming back to, is whether or not we're going to do a good job and provide the services we need to provide our community. I think that it's obvious that we need revenue, we need income to be able to pay for these services, and cutting revenue will result in a loss in service level whether great or small, depending on the cut in revenue. I think quite often there are calls for us to cut our revenue by not increasing rates or imposing a rates freeze or something like that. But there's no guidance given as to what services should be cut or where that money should come from. And personally, I think that's a rather I'm trying to find a polite way to say. Yeah, I can't. So I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's honest. I don't think it's brave to simply say, well, look, finding the cuts is someone else's problem. We've heard reference to pet projects by both councillors at times, not tonight I don't think, but at other times, and by speakers tonight. Name them. Tell us, what are these pet projects that you think we should not be funding? Because I never hear this. The ROP group will come and tell us that you're spending too much on pet projects. Tell us, what are these pet projects? I would love to know what are the pet projects so that we can have an informed discussion about particular projects and what is good for our community and what is perhaps not needed. And we can disagree or we can agree or whatever, but just using the term pet projects is just needlessly stirring up this idea that there's a whole bunch of silly little things that we're spending huge amounts on, but those are never named, and I feel that's unfair. Similarly, the term special interest groups came up like 10 times tonight. Who are the special interest groups? Please tell us who they are. Tell us who we are providing funding to that have a special interest that you think we shouldn't provide funding to. I would like to know. We can have that discussion about whether it's valuable to our community to fund these groups or not. But name them. Don't just say special interest groups. Again,
okay. If you could just pause for a minute. We don't need to interject, Councillor Bond. Okay. He wasn't interjecting whilst you were speaking.
Rhetorical question.
Give him the same courtesy. And yes, I think it was a rhetorical question.
It was a rhetorical. I look forward to your answer. We'll catch up afterwards. But seriously, I think it's better for the dialogue within our community and around the discussions around our budget and what our priorities are, to instead of throwing out loaded terms like special interest groups, tell us who you're talking about, and we'll have that discussion. And we can. Okay, still rhetorical, Councillor Bond. I also just wanted to address, there was another speaker that said when a council officer is going to look at efficiencies. In our budget every single year, it's actually put in there a target and how much we expect our officers to make up in efficiencies every single budget. And they are proving amazingly capable of squeezing blood from a stone and getting more and more out of less and less every single year. And that is clear to the entire community. So I do find it problematic for people to say, when is council going to start looking for these? We look for it every single year, actually. And some people can say, maybe you're not going hard enough. Let's have that discussion. That's fine. But to say we're not even looking is honestly, I think, pretty insulting to the hardworking staff that we have here. So that was my list of things I wanted to cover off on. I will be supporting this rate rise. It will help us fund the services and the projects that the community needs, particularly in these difficult economic times. It will help us deliver a community that we all love, and it will prevent us from going backwards.
Thanks, Councillor Bond. Who else would like to speak for or against this motion?
Sorry, I'm Councillor Baxter, just so.
Did I call you Councillor Bond?
You did.
Shame on me. Sorry, Deputy Mayor Baxter. Well, he was speaking, right, the whole time, basically. So, yeah. Councillor Consolo?
In a way, I'm reluctant to support the 1.75 rate rise. However, there could be 4 councillors tonight that vote against it. We're already at 3, so I have to really consider how I plan to vote. It would be great to be able to tell everybody I voted against it, but not have to worry about the actual impact of what this last-minute change would do. I acknowledge we're in tough times, uncertain times. It seems every day there's news of increases, as is being felt by council. 1.75 is well under the current inflation, and I note that there's been some money set aside as a buffer. It is important, though, to keep on top of this, as it's likely to get worse. Our services will also have sustained or increased demand in these trying times, and cost of building works and maintenance is very high, but important to keep on top of. I remember last year being vilified on a letterbox drop for voting for the rate rise and received abusive calls and messages, many saying that they were asset rich and cash poor. It is definitely an issue, especially for those who've been in their houses for 40 plus years. On note, in the last section, I voted for the rating strategy proposed, including the separate rates charge that will lead to reductions this year for those more expensive properties. Unfortunately, this does have an impact on our less expensive properties. To those experiencing hardship, please get in contact with the Council Rates Department to discuss options. Although I will likely be supporting the rate rise tonight, I'd like to foreshadow that I have an amendment in the last section addressing the rate rise next financial year, as it takes a long time to work through identifying potential rate or cost reductions that would enable Council to consider adopting a rates increase at a level below the rates cap, down to a zero rates increase in 23-24. These have to be ongoing savings, not once-offs, to not impact our 10-year financial forecasts, which are harder to find because the officers do find and have already found all the lower-hanging fruit of efficiencies. I understand the arguments put that it can't be an endless bucket of money. I think Council has an opportunity, and now approaching the end of our second, going into our third year of experience for us new councillors, to deep dive into this budget and make sure we're spending money where we need to, what additional spending we prioritize, and what we could possibly save on to potentially reduce the rate rise next year. I don't take my vote lightly, but please note my sincere interest in a more thorough process in 23-24 that started earlier. It's not that we don't try, it's just that we have to move it forward, probably to go a little bit deeper to ensure that we are looking at these rates and considering them, because tonight, we've been through a long process, and I think that it's too late to change it tonight, but really want to dedicate to going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Consolo. Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. I'll be supporting this tonight. We've heard from the various views in our community, and I note that there's a real depth of sentiment around investing in our community and the services and projects that make Port Phillip continue to be a fantastic place to live. We're lucky to be in a good financial position relative to some other councils, and I want to pay tribute to the good financial management of past councils that has brought us to this position today. I think that the comments that have come through tonight's debate around hardship are real, and I'll note I agree with what Councillor Baxter has said around the extraordinary hardship that we put in place for last year and the relatively low uptake of that, but that's not to say that hardship is not considered every year by Council. We do have quite generous by comparison to all LGA's hardship provisions, particularly for pensioners and those who might be experiencing difficulty in paying their rates. So please, the information is always provided in rates notices to our community, and if that is you, don't hesitate to get in touch. Our officers, I think, do an exemplary job in processing these claims each year. So, look, it's really important that we continue to invest in our community because of the times that we're in. The things that make this city a great place to live is its strong history of investing in community, in providing material aid, in providing housing support, in providing all manner of services and facilities that keep our community stronger and healthier than they would be if we had a council that focused on austerity and stripping money out of the budget in order to satisfy, claims around spending. The thing I think is important to recognise as well is there's always talk about finding efficiencies. As has been mentioned, officers do that each year. The reality is we do have to go through a really difficult prioritisation process every year. Every year we are met by calls from the community to invest more in services that they would like to see that would deliver really excellent outcomes for our community. And every year it's difficult for us as councillors because
not everybody's requests are able to be satisfied, and not all of those services that would be really valuable to our community are able to be met. We have significant projects into the future that are still unfunded that are going to be absolutely critical for our community going forward, particularly in relation to development of open space. And I take on board what Councillor Bond said. I know Councillor Bond is never a fan of the dot points and the strategies and the makings, but having plans and policies to guide our officers' work in revitalising our public spaces, in making sure that our services meet current and future community needs. This is absolutely the core work of local government. So you can't really have the outcome without the planning. It just doesn't add up. So I'm really happy to, sorry Mayor, it's an important meeting and there are deeply held views in the community about this one. So I'm very happy to support the rate increase tonight. It enables council to continue to invest in our community. If hardship is an issue for you, please reach out. And I'll just close by noting I checked the ABS quick stats, which are newly updated. Ooh, exciting. New stats for our community. And the difficulty with cutting rates and cutting our budget accordingly is that more than half of people in Port Phillip, more than half of households that are occupied, 51%, are rented. And so slashing council budgets and cutting services only delivers a negative for more than half of our population because they see diminished services and they don't get any benefit, even the relatively minor benefit that some might see from a small rate cut. So I think that we often don't think about that 50% of households when we're having these debates, and I just wanted to note that renters are really valuable members of our community too, and they deserve a council that will invest in them.
Thanks, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Martin, you wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor. Our 22-23 budget process started 5 months ago, and there have been lots of discussions, lots of navel-gazing, lots of sleepless nights, and we've tried to put together a document which we think satisfies most of our community concerns, and will never make everyone happy, but I think as a group of 9 of us, we've done our best to try and look after the various constituents that we represent, and we've now come up with a document which we're going to vote on in a few minutes' time. If we're going to be able to implement everything in that document, we need to have the funds available to do it. Now, I take Councillor Sirikoff's point that skyrocketing costs, I think she said, there's all sorts of things going on that are impacting on people, and she's very correct there, but they're also implementing on council. So if petrol prices increase, it affects the council. If electricity prices increase, it affects the council. Building costs increase, it affects the council. And if there are wage demands, they're going to affect the council as well. So it's important that council puts together a budget that's able to deliver all those things that we have agreed to eventually, if not by consensus, at least with at least 5 councillors supporting each of the particular items there, and not have a situation where we find that we've got to dip into our reserves to support some items in that budget halfway through the year. So I believe it's a conservative document. It's a document which delivers great outcome to the community, and it can only be delivered effectively if we can have a 1.75% rate increase in order to fund that. However, as a number of people have raised concerns with the council over the 2 years I've been involved, there are some people who are hit much harder by increase in rates than others, because particularly those people who are asset rich and cash poor, and the new rating scheme which we passed about an hour ago will ameliorate the effects of any rate increase on them. In fact, for many of those people, they're going to have a significant rate decrease. So we've tried to come up with a document with a budget which delivers all those services that we believe our community want, with a ratings program that tries not to put an overly great burden on those people who can least afford it. Someone mentioned, I had a note here, special interest groups. I think Councillor Baxter referred to them as well. I went through the budget the other night and I was looking at all the different items there, and I was trying to work out what would a special interest group be. Is it people in a tennis club if we're funding, looking at redoing the tennis courts in a particular area? Or is it sporting groups? Is it the members of OPAC? We can deliver a budget that only looks after rubbish and parking and things like that, or we can deliver a budget that tries to look after the best interests of everyone in our community. And I note Councillor Bond's comments, and Councillor, I agreed with 85% of what you said earlier today. I agree that we shouldn't be looking at a rate cap and saying, oh, we can spend up to X percent. We should be looking at only spending what's appropriate, and we shouldn't say, oh, we can spend a bit more because the rate cap is, or there are particular times when we might want to say, well, look, we really need to spend this even though we prefer to keep our rate expenditure lower. But we should be looking at items that are going to be of benefit to all of our community, and as Councillor Consola has foreshadowed, perhaps we need to look a little bit harder in future years to make sure that we do get it right. But given the process that we've gone through, I'm very comfortable that the only way that we can fund a budget that I think is going to deliver to what the vast majority of our community would say is a reasonable spread of services is one which incorporates the 1.75% rate increase, which we're about to vote on.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Let's do that under division, councillors. So voting under division. Those in favour, Councillors Baxter, Crawford, Martin, Consolo, Copsey. Councillors against, Bond, Sirikoff, Pearl, Clark. Motion carried. Let's now move to part 3 of item 3.3. Councillor Crawford has foreshadowed that she has a amended motion she'd like to move. So Councillor Crawford, I'll give you the ability to do that.
Oh, I thought I was just doing an amendment to the... It's not an alt-rec.
You do it as an alt-rec?
Yes, I can. Yes, I would move an alt-rec would include my amendment. Is that up there? As would it be 3.7.8? Can we scroll down just to check it's up there? Yep, so that would be my amendment. I'll read it out. So 3.7.8 provides a 3-year funding agreement of $9,000 per annum, excluding GST, to Wild at Heart Community Arts to be used specifically for hire of council facilities expenses to support the group for a further 3 years while they transition to a different funding model.
Great. Looking for a seconder. Deputy Mayor Baxter. I've got a request to vote on this under to separate out 3.7.6. Are there any other requests? No. Okay. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to your your motion, please?
So these are just a few additional items that our community has requested during the budget submission that we have agreed to include, either as with extra budget or as can be accommodated in our business as usual budget. And so there's a whole list of things like extra food for the Port Phillip Community Group. Obviously, in this difficult time, the need for food in our municipality has increased even since COVID. So that gives you a sign of, I guess, the spectrum of people's ability to put food on the table. That we are a very rich, but also in some parts a not so rich municipality, and that's something worth noting. It includes $200,000 for promotion and marketing of the city, as recommended by the BAG, the Business Advisory Group. We're going to give some money to the Carlisle Street Traders to help support the street in its recovery, because it is difficult for high streets given the change in retail. And we're going to bring forward some money to J.L. Murphy Baseball Club for the lighting project to be done alongside. Is that in addition to the grounds? I think it's in addition to the grounds. Anyway, we're bringing forward money on that one. But the one I'd like to, my alt-rec adds in, is we heard from Phil, who runs the community arts group Wild at Heart, and they have for a very long time provided a real outlet for connection, for artistic expression, for purpose to the most vulnerable and marginalised members of our community. And if you ever go along, it's amazing what musical acts they can come up with. But the cost of hiring a space and providing that is beyond their funding models. So I'm asking councillors to agree. It's not money we'll actually receive. It's just a waiver for what we could have charged. And I'd ask you to consider that for the next 3 years to allow them to continue their great work. I think that's all I wanted to say right now. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Clark.
I wanted to ask a clarifying question of the addition. Sorry. So, am I correct in understanding that the organisation was given a 6-month notice period that support would come to an end in terms of the waiver on using the facility? And note that your amendment then delivers another 3 years to provide that funding so that they can have a waiver, if that's correct.
Just to clarify for the record, you're referring to Wild at Heart.
Yes, sorry, the
There's a motion,
3.7.8.
an amendment, yep.
And then I guess the follow-up to that
let's
is...
just do with that to start with. Councillor Crawford, you don't have to answer this if you don't wish to. We can throw it to an officer if you wish. I'll give you the opportunity to choose that.
No, that's the intention, is to... in their funding model, it is an expense. It would cause them to possibly not continue.
Okay, I'll give the officers an opportunity to respond if they wish. You don't have to. Chris Carroll.
Through you, Mayor, I'm not sure of what notice period or discussions we've had in terms of, but the policy has been known for some time, and in last year's budget process, there was agreement of a waiver then. So unless there's a more specific question, that's probably all I can...
Thanks, Chris Carroll. Councillor Clark, another clarifying question.
Yeah, so given that my understanding is the waiver or the notice period was given and now we're looking to provide an additional 3 years, what sort of transition requirements are going to be put in place so that they will be able to fund this at the end of 3 years?
I'll ask the officers to respond to that. Chris Carroll, are you able to answer that question for Councillor Clark?
Through you, Mayor, I could consider that further, but at this stage that'd be up to the responsibility of the entity itself to work through.
Thank you. Okay. Deputy Mayor Baxter, I'll let you speak as seconder of the motion.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I won't spend too long, but basically I think a lot of comments we get during our consultation, perhaps not a lot, but sometimes we get people saying, you know, what's the point of engaging in consultation? You know, your draft budget, you're just going to pass the same draft budget. It's not going to change. You've already decided what you want to do. And I just want to point out that, you know, that process of consultation actually does often bring up opportunities that we've missed or other things that we would subsequently decide to put in, such as these sorts of submissions, and I'd just like to endorse all of them.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Baxter. Who else would like to speak to this item? Councillor Consolo.
Thank you. I'll be supporting all of these tonight, but just wanted to give a little extra to the baseball club. I really support moving forward the lights by a year, given how early the sun sets in winter. Without the lights, the club is severely limited in training time. The club has a long history and impressive membership growth and play year-round. I wish it could be faster and ask council officers if there's any opportunity to do so, please consider it a priority.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Consolo. Anybody else wish to speak? I'll ask Councillor Crawford if she wishes to close. She doesn't. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll put 3.7.6, which is Waterfront Welcomes funding of contribution of $20,000 to be accommodated within the existing budget for economic recovery. I'm putting that motion. I'm putting this motion under parts, and that's the first part, which is 3.7.6. We all clear? So I'm putting that motion now. Those in favour? Those against? That motion is carried. That part of the motion is
Could I
carried.
have that as a division, please, Mayor?
Yeah, Councillor Copsey has called a division on that voting in part. I now call on councillors in favour of that. Councillors Bond, Councillor Copsey, Consolo, Pearl, Martin, Crawford and Baxter, and those councillors against are Councillor Sirikoff and Councillor Clark. Thank you. We'll now vote on 3.7, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.7 and 0.8. Those councillors in favour? That's carried unanimously. No, we did it as one item. We voted on them in parts, but we did them in one item. That's carried unanimously, if I didn't say that. Okay, now I ask councillors to note that the officers have prepared a alternate for those that have conflict of interest, which we've described as 3A and 3B in the recommendation for the purpose of assisting councillors to manage those conflicts of interest. So I now call on Councillor Copsey to declare a conflict.
Thank you. I'm absenting myself out of an abundance of caution as I own property in the vicinity of Packington Street, St Kilda East, and in relation to the Port Melbourne Yacht Club have previously received a disclosable gift.
And Councillor Baxter for 3B.
Oh, would I declare that now or when we get to 3B?
Yeah, fair point. You're not leaving for 3A, right?
No.
Yeah, that's fine. Stay here. Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Okay, so I'll move and I seek a seconder for 3A we're talking about here. If you can put that up. There it is. And Councillor Martin to second. I don't wish to speak. Councillor Martin doesn't wish to speak. Anybody else wish to? Okay, and I'll put that motion to you. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. And if you could call Councillor Copsey back in and Councillor... Oh, she's got B as well. Councillor Baxter, go and join Councillor Copsey.
Sure. Well, I'll just declare my conflict of interest with regards to the Port Melbourne Yacht Club funding due to a campaign donation in 2016.
Thank you. If you just get 3A and off the screen and 3B up, that'd be great. All right, I'm happy to move 3B. Councillor Martin's happy to second. Nobody wishes to speak to the item. Now put that motion to councillors. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. And we now ask for Councillor Copsey and Councillor Baxter to return to the chamber. Councillors, we're now considering part 4. Welcome back. So now considering part 4, happy to take any clarifying questions or questions. Just a quick reminder. Okay, I'm looking for a mover for part 4. I've got Councillor Clark moving and Councillor Sirikoff for second. Councillor Clark.
I wish to reserve.
Thank you. No troubles. Councillor Sirikoff. No. Who else would like to speak to the for or against the motion that Councillor Clark has put? Councillor Crawford.
Tonight, I think it's really important to deal with facts, put the facts on the table. I usually prefer telling a story or two, but tonight's a night for facts. Look, it's a challenging time economically and in terms of delivery with a tight jobs market, rising inflation, huge increase in costs in construction, stagnant wages, supply chain issues, COVID disruption, and the list just goes on. However, under the Local Government Act 2020, there are 4 principles of sound financial management that we are responsible for as councillors. The first one is to prudently manage financial risks related to debts, assets and, I can't read my own writing, liabilities, there you go, and alignment to our council plan and strategies. So that's our main, one of the key principles, aligned with our council plan and strategies. Then the second one is to provide reasonable stability in terms of the level of rates burden. And the third is to consider the financial impacts of council decisions on future generations. And the fourth one is about being transparent. So it's a big ask, the Local Government Act, of what we have to decide here as councillors. But I do think that this budget delivers on those principles. We are being prudent by taking the small overall increase to the rates at 1.75%, because this allows us to deal with the inflation and future shocks coming our way while still delivering on all the needs of our community, such as oval upgrades or ageing assets, rebuilds or refurbishing. Also, given much of our overall revenue can fluctuate, it would be remiss to not ensure that we continue to have the capacity to provide for the community at this time. We have also, in this budget, used 2 levers to stabilise rates particularly for residential property owners, especially those of higher value houses and townhouses, which have been disproportionately bearing the rating burden over the years. So we are doing that. But noting, as has been mentioned tonight, that we are actually elected not just for ratepayers, but for our whole municipality. So that means residents, that means people who visit here, that means people who work here, the whole shebang. So moving to a CIV rating system ensures that we can adjust the balance between residential and commercial and industrial properties. And introducing a waste charge, which is essentially a flat charge, that again ensures flats pay a little more and houses pay a little less. However, despite these levers and discounts, it is important to remember that it is the fact that rates is essentially a property tax, and we do not create the equation. And the biggest determinant of that of rates is the amount you pay on the amount you pay is the increase of the value of your property as compared to the increase of or decrease in value of all the other properties in the municipality. That is the design of the rates equation, and the commercial market determines house prices. Now, the long investment by council and other levels of government have made this a very desirable area to live, and some property values are increasing greatly, which is good for some, whereas others, property prices are kind of staying stagnant. Not so good for some. But council has heard in this regard people's concerns around this rating burden, and so we have done the fairest thing we can. We've redistributed a portion of rates, and that will go through the waste charge. Could be a victory for some councillors, and I am confused how they would vote against something that they say they care about. Now, Principle 3 is to consider the financial impacts on future generations. We already know that many of the forward projects in our 10-year plan are not fully funded. These projects have to happen. It's not a nice-to-have project. They will be required in the future. So future councils and residents will need to deal with that. Therefore, not taking the small increase to the overall pie, which over 10 years will be $79 million, we are robbing current residents, but future residents of $79 million to invest back in things like open spaces, renourishing beaches, upgrading and future-proofing new sporting facilities and community centres, as examples. That would be irresponsible and not sound management. So important things to note, as I said, there are some really big risks coming at us, and there are some really big things that have not fully funded in the long term, such as the Elwood Foreshore upgrade, the upgrades of childcare centres, upgrades of many of the sporting facilities and grounds. Do we do it properly, or do we do it to future-proof for growth in the area, particularly at the end of Fisherman's Bend? What we heard from our community is over this budget submission and during the year is what they want. They want more greening, more action on climate, more open space, more dog parks, more activations, more support for our high streets at a time when retail has radically changed, upgrades to ovals and lights and sports facilities, more female change rooms, more tennis courts, more cleaning, mobile CCTV, improve the Station Pier at entryway to our city and Melbourne at large, improve drainage to the bay, mitigate flooding. The list goes on. We also know the huge risks of Fisherman's Bend and climate change. The example recently, unexpectedly, well, maybe not so unexpectedly, part of Elwood Beach is washed away. We have no budget to renourish that, and the state government has very limited budget, and there is a lot of beachfronts around our Port Phillip Bay. So we need money to that. Or do we just ignore that one and talk about cutting rates? There's soil contamination. There's greater demand on our open spaces. We've inherited 3 bridges that over the next decade will need repairing. To be a responsible organisation means to assess the risk and plan for it. It means balancing the now and the future. Now, this budget does that. Imperfectly, perhaps, but that's okay. No budget is ever going to be perfect. It does it by pulling 2 levers. We've changed to CIV, and we've additionally have an additional waste charge that redistributes the rates burden. So we are listening to that portion of our community. But the bigger part that it does, it looks to the future and provides the services and assets that our community constantly tells us they want, and provides a small surplus to deal with the headwinds which are sure to come in this following financial year. Huge thanks to the officers who have worked on the budget, from the workshop stage to all the officers involved in the community engagement stage and to the budget itself. As it's stated in the budget document, Council's greatest asset, although not exactly captured in our asset management plan, is our officers. They go above and beyond to serve our community. And although this is not always recognised, it is very impressive and it is much appreciated. So thank you to all the submitters and the community for their contributions. I am always learning more, and I'm always trying to understand the varying needs and wants to the best of my ability and to deliver that in the decisions I make. I know we have not got everything right or have delivered everything that everyone wants, but I can guarantee one thing about this budget. Whatever decisions we make, there will always be more need that outstrips the amount of money, the rates we collect and the revenue we gather. Our local area will always need more than we can deliver in that moment. And given we know the risks of climate change coming at us, I think that the budget we are producing allows us to look to the future, plan for the future, look after our current residents and ratepayers, but also do our best to leave the council finances in a good state for future residents and future councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Who else would like to speak to part 4? Everybody, Councillor Clark to close?
No.
Okay. Councillors, I put that motion. All those in favour? Those against? It's carried unanimously. Sorry, it wasn't carried unanimously. It was carried. So I was just getting ahead to waiting for someone to call a division, but they didn't. Now, Councillor Consolo... No, I've moved on. I've declared it. Do you want it? Part 5, Councillor Consolo, you've foreshadowed previously. Would you like to move the officer's recommendation or an alternate motion?
Yes, please. I'd like to move an alternative motion, please.
Go ahead.
I want to make sure I'm not missing something on this, but otherwise I'll just read out the additional items. I think the numbering's... Oh, there we go.
That's right.
Okay. 3.11 requests the CEO to work with Council from the beginning of the 2022-23 financial year to identify options for ongoing cost reductions that would enable Council to consider adopting a rates increase at a level below the rates cap down to a zero rates increase in financial year 23-24. 3.12 request the CEO to bring a report back to Council as soon as possible, detailing the scope and program of work required to implement 3.11, including any additional resources required to undertake this work. And 3.13, request the CEO to bring a report back to Council by the end of November 2022 to enable Council to determine which of these options identified through the process described in 3.12 it will progress for implementation through the 23-24 budget process, including the level of community engagement required or recommended to inform Council's decision-making on the options in the budget process.
Thank you, Councillor Consolo. Looking for a seconder of Councillor Consolo's motion there. Councillor Clark to second. Councillor Consolo, just to clarify, if you wish, do you wish this to be voted in part or full?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, that was on the screen before. Do you wish to move it in parts or just vote on as go?
I think in whole.
Yep, no problems at all. Councillor Consolo.
Can I reserve it? Do I have to speak to it now?
Of course you can. Councillor Clark. Do you wish to speak?
Oh, shit.
No problem. Clarifying question?
Yeah, please.
You've seconded this motion, just to be clear.
Yep.
Yeah? Okay. No problem. Just a clarifying question, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, so could the CEO, or through you, Mayor, envisage how this review process would work?
Yep, sure. CEO.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Clark. Through you, Mayor, if this motion gets up, I know at the beginning of the financial year is this Friday, so we would endeavour to do a series of workshops. The first workshop, which is contemplated in 3.12, is to work with Council to define the scope. And I note that in defining the scope, that the rates cap for next year has not been set. So if you're aiming for a 0% rate increase in 23-24, assuming inflation goes higher, that could be a considerable target. If it's double the rates cap of this year, to get zero rates, you're looking circa 5 million. So the scope would set the target of cost savings down to 0%. It would, I think initially in the workshop, we would work with you to set criteria for identifying priority areas to review. We would discuss with you the depth of dive, if you like, or analysis you wanted to do. So there's been some discussion around zero-based accounting. That's an extensive and time-consuming exercise. It might be that you don't want to apply that to all options, but there are particular options where you want to get down to a transaction cost through that sort of process. And the aim would be, if we can find the time with councillors, to get that down the funnel of analysis to bring a report back in November, by the end of November, which is when the 23-24 budget process starts in earnest, for council to consider which of the options they've identified, and that would also have some quantum attached to those options they want to progress through the budget process either. And the last part of the amendment of the op motion there says some of those you'll be able to consult on through the normal budget process. If you're removing a service altogether, I know we're talking about cost reductions, not efficiencies here, or withdrawing funding altogether, you may want to do some additional consultation on that outside of your normal budget consultation. And again, the last part of the process, which requires us to cost it, we will try and bring that early on once we know the scope in terms of any additional resources that we might need. And again, that will depend on the scope and the depth of analysis you do. If we can do it through BAU, we will. If we want to do forensic accounting, deep depth analysis down to sort of transaction level, we may need some additional help. But we'll know that when we've got the scope.
And just to follow up, if I may, Mayor. So how would officers advise councillors to prioritise items within this budget review process?
Under 3.12 of the alt motion through you, Mayor, before we bring a report back to council, we would do a workshop with council to set the criteria for prioritising. We've been down this track in terms of identifying options, certainly in my time here. So I think we would want to get the criteria and options identified pretty firmly up front and brought back as early as possible in the first report back to council, so that there's a commitment to do the work on them.
Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Clark, do you wish to speak to the item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
I think, given the comments I've made earlier tonight, I think the ability to work in a methodical and structured and detailed way to review the vast expenditure of this council brings a lot of opportunities and will provide a lot of insights and understanding around where we're spending the money, how we're spending the money. It is a large budget with a whole lot of areas across so many sections in how we spend money, and I think it's quite hard to get a detailed understanding of that as you sit from a councillor perspective. The officers obviously understand this very well, and I'm looking forward to these workshops to be able to enlighten me more and see what constructive conversations we can have with officers and also across councillors, so that we may reach some consensus on where we could potentially look for expenditure savings or efficiencies, and then see how that looks in terms of our impact on rates. So I welcome this process and this motion, and appreciate the work that Councillor Consolo's done in bringing this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Is there any other councillor wish to speak for or against Councillor Consolo's motion? Councillor Martin, go ahead.
I find myself in agreement with Councillor Clark. I've been on council for 2 years. I've tried to go through and understand all of the budget documents. I think I understand them. I think I've got a mental justification that everything that's in our current budget should go through. But you've heard me mention I think on 3 occasions already tonight, I don't believe we should be organising our budget based around a particular cap of money. We should be basing our budget around those activities that we believe, those projects, those initiatives that we believe are appropriate for the City of Port Phillip. And the best way to do that is to go and have a deep dive. Now, I do caution my councillors that it's possible that the result of the deep dive we may identify areas where we believe we need to spend more rather than less. So who knows what's going to come out of it. But I think, given that we've now all been on council for a minimum of 2 years, some of us 6, one of us 10, here's a great opportunity for us to really investigate what our council is delivering, what's it delivering effectively. Are all these areas appropriate? It may well be that we may decide that we can reduce expenditure in some areas. We may decide that there are some areas that we shouldn't be funding at all. But I caution also it may also be that we might identify areas where we might like to commit additional funds. So we may get down to a 0 rate cap. With the way that CPI is going, the likelihood is that the rate cap for the next financial year could easily be 4 or 5%. It may well be that even with some savings, we may still need to have a significant increase in rates. But I think it's certainly worth having the deep dive so that our community can see that we're taking their concerns very seriously. And whatever result that whatever recommendations we come out with at the end of the process, we ought to justify those back to our community.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Anyone else? Councillor Copsey, go ahead, and then we'll go to Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Mayor. And if I can first ask a process question, I'd like to request to the Mayor that we take this part in sections.
Yeah, sure. What would you like to vote on?
I would
not at 3.9, 3.10, then the rest?
Correct, and then the rest, yeah.
Happy to oblige to do that, no troubles at all.
Thank you, and then I will speak to it now. Thank you for accommodating that request. I'm supportive of the adoption of the overall council plan and the financial plan, the revenue rating plan and the budget. I think it's excellent that we've had such a thorough process and that councillors have really put forward considered views as part of debate tonight. I'm really appreciative of the quality of debate that's been made. I think everybody's values and drivers have been really clearly laid out, and I appreciate that. The parts that Councillor Consolo has put in 311 through 313, I'm not supportive of these at this stage. I understand the driver behind them. However, my reflection on our budget process each year is that we undertake a very fulsome consideration, not only of the rate that we're going to strike, which does include consideration of whether it's going to be the full rate cap or not, and we don't make a final decision on that until we adopt the budget each year. I also just feel that given the comments I've made earlier around the obvious need in our city and the projects that go unfunded each year, I believe that we'll undertake this work as part of our regular budget process, and I'm hesitant to put a further workload onto officers that seems to be framing the task as finding things that we need to reduce. We do a very fulsome budget process, as I've said, and that includes at some points, giving councillors opportunity to look line by line at budget items and also to examine the service delivery plans of each of our organisations, departments. So I appreciate the thrust of it. However, I'm satisfied that our current process will actually address what needs to be done here without adding in the need for further reports. But I'll be very happy to support 3.9 and 3.10. And I thank the officers for the huge amount of work that goes in, and also to all of the community members who've participated in our budget process this year.
Thanks, Councillor Copsey. Just to clarify, we're voting in part, so you don't get another opportunity to speak. So if you wish to speak to this motion now. Councillor Bond, then Councillor Sirikov.
Thank you.
Did I miss you, Councillor Baxter, early on? I'm sorry, I've been looking to my left too much. It's troublesome. Councillor Bond.
Should certainly cease doing that. I was going to say, yeah, this is the additional amendments here. I sort of agree with Councillor Copsey that this is something we should be doing anyway, other than maybe the report back to council. But we get quarterly updates back to council on our budget, and yeah, maybe this would be in addition or in place of one of those. So it's, there's not. I don't think there's that much change to what we would normally do through that. Maybe formalising a little bit of what we do, but I think it's. I've just made some notes here, following on from Councillor Baxter's comments about we never come with ideas on where we could spend less. I mean, there's over the years I've got long lists here of things where we've spent money on planning, we've spent money on staff, we've spent money on consultants, but nothing's ever actually happened with the community. You can go all the way back to the Fitzroy Street Structure Plan from 2009, which we never did anything with. We never completed much of it. The Carlisle Street Structure Plan from 2011, that Balaclava car park redevelopment, we're 11 years down the track and we still haven't turned the first sod, but we've probably had someone employed the entire 11 years to look at that, look at opportunities and working on it. I know I could probably name 5 or 6 staff that I know were hired to work on that and then left and the next person comes along and does it.
Point of order, Councillor Copsey?
Point of order.
I presume it's been a long night, so you don't have to specify
rules,
on the
but I'm
48
concerned that we're speaking to aspects of the role that are the purview of the staff, not councillors.
Yeah, I'll remind Councillor Bond, let's keep it with council decisions as opposed to reflections on individual staff members.
I don't think I've ever mentioned a staff member. I'm talking about projects. These are all projects.
Yeah, not calling a point of order per se, just asking you as a request.
I'm talking about projects. The Bay Street Structure Plan for about 2012, 2013. We go back to the Lagoon Reserve Master Plan, which we did in 2012. Now that we actually intend to do something with Lagoon Reserve, the first comment we got was, we need to redo the master plan. And we go through O'Donnell Gardens, the fountain down there, where we spent $300,000 on a fountain that doesn't work. These are all the things that happen in our community. None of them are service cuts. None of them are things that the community have come along tonight and said, I want you to keep spending $300,000 on fountains that don't work. They're the things that will make the difference to our budget here, and it happens throughout the year as we progress as a council. Things like the dog review. We spent $300,000 on a dog review 2 years after we spent probably a similar amount on a dog review. These are the items that come to council that we could make an impact. We could get that $2.3 million that we're putting rates up tonight. Cumulatively, these things will add up to that. To say that we don't sit here and put forward ideas, we put forward ideas every week that some of you rush to put your hands up to spend money instead of sitting back and thinking that, hey, what impact is this going to have on our long-term financial plan? Do we really have to spend this money?
Point of order, Mayor.
What section, Deputy Mayor Baxter?
Oh, you didn't make...
I'm listening to Councillor Bond very carefully. What section?
I think it's that section
48.2 requires you to give me a section or a reason or a division.
I guess I won't then.
I think
I'm listening to Councillor Bond very carefully.
I was speaking to the budget. I was speaking to the history of this budget, and things where people think that if we were to look at some fiscal responsibility in this organisation, it automatically involves cuts to services. It automatically involves us not spending on something that the community's suddenly going to miss. I don't think any of these things the community's actually going to miss if we didn't do them. Throw the St Kilda Triangle in there, $20 million over 20 years. To do what? We've still got a car park. It hasn't moved, and I'm very reluctant to spend money on that again. So they're the sorts of things that if we just showed some fiscal restraint throughout the year, we didn't rush to spend money every time something comes to us, because these things do always cost more than we anticipate at the time, and that's how we can make these savings without some deep dive reviews, without some sort of cuts to services, without slashing and burning that everyone thinks that a little bit of restraint involves. It doesn't. It just involves us showing a little bit of restraint at key times throughout the year, and we'll find $2 million easily every year. Every single year we'll find that. So, it's not something that we should run around and say, hey, we need this massive review to find cuts and savings and slash and burn. Just show restraint throughout the year. It's less than 1% of our budget that we need to find here to be able to do this. And, I think that's quite achievable if throughout the year when we sit in meetings like this and, hey, do we really need to do this? We just show a little bit of restraint and we're there.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Deputy Mayor Baxter, sorry for not seeing you before. I'm willing to give either or. Or should we just go back to the mover?
Sure. Well, no, look, all right.
Deputy Mayor Baxter, go ahead.
Cheers. Thank you, Mayor. Look, I will support 3.9 and 3.10 as those are relatively uncontroversial. I won't be supporting Councillor Consolo's alt motion or amendment. What are we calling it at this point? Anyway, basically, I think I applaud Councillor Consolo's attempt to thread the needle between a range of philosophically different views on the role of council, how it collects revenue and what it should do with that and how it manages that. But I do think that this motion doesn't this amendment, rec, whatever it is, doesn't quite make it clear what it is we want to do. Basically, if this is asking the CEO to help us review the budget with a view to trying to be more efficient, well, that does that every year, right? We all do that every year, right? We can all agree or disagree as to whether we've done a good job or not, but that is what we do. That's budgeting. If it's asking the CEO to find cuts for us, then my preference would be that councillors have the courage to identify cuts themselves. I think this proposal it's geared towards finding a 0% rate rise, even though the language leaves it relatively vague and allows us to sort of not do that. But it's just so. It seems to me to be quite silly to base our budgeting and our spending on an arbitrary amount of revenue that we want to raise. So we want to raise this much, therefore our spending should reflect how much we want to raise. To me, that's not an efficient way or a useful way to budget. Instead, your budgeting should account for what are our needs, what are the environmental circumstances around that, and what can we realistically use for revenue. So I just think that to sort of hamstring ourselves and say that we really want to try to aim for less than the rate cap when we don't even know what the rate cap is, and we're looking at how much we want to raise in revenue to guide our spending, and that figure is completely arbitrary in difficult and unpredictable economic times, I think is pure fiscal vandalism. I think is a terrible way to run a budgeting process. So I can't support it for that reason.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Baxter. Councillor Sirikoff, do you wish to speak now? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Coming into council was a complete learning process and overwhelming during the first year. Learning about setting the budget and how you go about the budget. I wish I knew, had a little bit more background to it. When we went into the first few months of looking at how the budget would be set up for the 28 service profiles, and going into the budget, we were given an opportunity to go through it line by line, which I would have really appreciated, to know how we were spending money and if it was well done or was overdone or underdone. But unfortunately, when we all sat around the table discussing this, not everybody was on board, saying we've done this before, even though there were 4 new councillors on board who hadn't been part of that line-by-line process. And I think it's a situation where it's due diligence for all of us to be careful of how we spend other people's monies. We still deliver the services. We're not going to burn and slash and cut everything. It's about just refining it. And also, after 2 years of COVID and going into another year of high inflation rates, rising cost of living, we should be careful with how money is being spent. And as Councillor Bond said, there's been many projects that have been put on the shelf, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, that have just been wasted. So I would like to thank Councillor Consolo for bringing this to Council tonight, and I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Sirikoff. Who else would like to speak to this motion? It's only mayors left, I think. No, Councillor Crawford, go ahead.
I think I have my microphone on the whole time. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, Councillor Bond, and at the time, some of the decisions that get made with best intentions. And some work and some don't, and that's life, full stop. Council's no different to that. I think there's always opportunity to assess at the time decisions we make and plans we make, strategies we do, master plans, all of that kind of thing. But I think to know it's not always easy to pinpoint what will work, especially right now with the changing economic circumstances, and not just economic circumstances, but a pandemic. Who saw that coming? That had a radical effect. That had a radical effect on our revenue that changes, like our parking revenue. So if we hadn't been smart and taken our rates and been wise with them, we wouldn't have been able to sort of get through that big shock without cutting huge amounts of things. We delayed a lot of things in terms of capital works. But look, I'm happy to support this. I don't know that I'm actually happy to support it for the reasons that are outlined there, but it's only to consider efficiencies and up to a possible zero rates increase. But actually what I'm interested in is if we go through the efficiency, we might find where there can be savings to fund those unfunded projects we have to deliver in the next 10 years anyway. So I think there's a win-win in it. We actually have to deliver on some of these big projects, and Fisherman's Bend, we have to find extra money. So I'm happy to look at this process because we might actually find the money that we already know we have to spend in the future. So I think it kind of swings both ways. I do think it's the parameters, though, have to be realistic. There's no way to go through any organisation of this size line by line, nor should we. We are a strategic body, and there are levels that we should look at, and there are levels we should not. Down line by line operationally is not our role. So I think we would need to define the parameters carefully. Of course, there's always room for efficiencies, and I know that as an organisation there is constantly looking for those efficiencies and also leveraging for other further revenue sources to be able to fund the many things we want to do. So I will support this, not so much for the zero rates increase, because I think that's unrealistic, but I am happy to look at efficiencies to actually fully fund the bridges that need repairing, the beaches that need re-nourishing, the future-proofing of our sports facilities as we upgrade them. I'm happy to do it for that purpose.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Consolo, do you wish to close?
Thank you. As I've already foreshadowed, I'm pleased to move this motion to address the rate rise next financial year. It takes a very long time to work through all these parts and to identify potential cost reductions that would enable council to do a rate increase of less than the cap or potentially the zero. Again, they have to be ongoing savings. They're not just once off saying, let's just not do that project this year, let's kick it to next year, then we get the savings. That would be more like a rebate, but not this ongoing ability to reduce our rates without impacting the 10-year financial plan. This approach may concern many in the community, especially those tonight that have spoken for the 1.7 rate rise, 0.3 or 0.313. Ensures the report also includes the level of community engagement required. So our community is across what we're proposing, and their input can be given. Thank you to the questions from Councillor Clark. Thank you for the responses by the CEO. That helps give a little bit more intel on what this could look like, but we don't know yet. Every year the budget process goes by very quickly, even though some of the days are very long. There are so many items to consider. The first reason I want to do this is to start the budget earlier. These first 18 months have been a whirlwind. Some of us have had to learn so much that we don't always know what needs a deeper look. This third financial year, which it would inform, is a great time. It doesn't have to be an annual deep dive unless we choose to do that deep dive on a couple items per year. The report being brought back to us will be discussed by all and decided how we proceed. I hear your points, Councillor Bond, about showing some restraint. Things come up and our community constantly requests more. I do struggle with the existing process for our budget, though, and I've expressed this to my fellow councillors. I think we need a little bit more information exactly in some of the areas. And perhaps it's more me than you guys don't need it, but this is a process I really believe in. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. Councillor Martin said that perhaps the savings identified are redistributed. We have different priorities. I don't know if that's exact words, but that's what I got from it. But given the strong divide in this council, with a 5-4 vote on the rate rise tonight, there are questions and spending theories that we need to work through. I have a very difficult position on this council in the centre. When we're divided, many stand firmly in their corners and aren't willing to necessarily entertain the other strongly held views on the other side. I think this process, we owe it to our community, we owe it to our councillors on this group, and I really hope you support this tonight. We are in control of what this actually ends up being.
Thank you, Councillor Consolo. Just a reminder, we're voting in parts, Councillor, so the first vote I'm going to put to you is for item 3.9 and 3.10, which is up on the screen there.
And, Mayor, can we take them in division, please?
Yeah, we can. Councillor Copsey has requested both of them to be done under division. I'm happy to do that. Those in favour? Councillors Sirikoff, Copsey, Consolo, Pearl, Martin, Crawford, Baxter, Clark. Those against, Councillor Bond. And I now take a vote under division for 3.11, 3.12 and 3.13. Those in favour, Councillor Bond, Councillor Sirikoff, Councillor Consolo, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Martin, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Clark. Those against, Councillors Baxter and it's like Simon Says, isn't it? Councillors Baxter and Copsey, both of those parts are carried. There be no further items. Well done, councillors. Thank you for your restraint, respect and good debate this evening. I declare the meeting closed.